Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good morning. This is Peter Cardwell here between now and 1 o'clock here on Talk. There's so much to discuss this morning. I want to get your voice on the air as always. Are we heading towards a military confrontation with Russia? Why are so many children off school with anxiety? That is a legacy, certainly, of lockdown. Gatwick Airport announcing a 43% rise on their drop-off fee. We'll talk about that as well. We'll talk about Farage's former school saying the racism claims are profoundly distressing. He, of course, denies that he ever said all of that stuff that he's accused of saying that. Lots on Israel as well. The US government considering labelling UNRWA, which is the organisation, supposedly a humanitarian organisation, riddled with Hamas terrorists. They are considering labelling it a foreign terrorist organisation. There's a lot in terms of the United States and where we are, where the special relationship is. Also, Primal Scream, the band, have been reported to the police for screening anti-Semitic images of the Star of David merged with a swastika for their song Swastika Eyes in a North London venue. We'll talk about that as well. Also, the NHS risking collapse from the threat of strikes and flu. Why is it that the NHS every year says, oh, unprecedented, oh, flu, it's the time of the year, it's flu season. It's unprecedented simply because it's a week earlier than it was last year. That's the only reason. It seems to take it by surprise every single time. We'll also talk about the Environment Secretary, or not the Environment Secretary, the Net Zero Secretary, Ed Miliband, being isolated as the EU prepares to reverse the petrol car ban. Lots to discuss between now and 1 o'clock. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a voice note, less than a minute please, on the main number. You can send me a WhatsApp text message on the main number, or you can give me a ring on the main number, which is of course 0344 499 1000. I see the phone's going already. We'll take as many calls, texts, tweets and voice notes as we can between now and 1 o'clock. So much to talk about here on Talk. Well, there is so much to talk about. The front page of the Daily Mail today is Al Cairns, who is a defence minister. He served in uniform himself for a long time. In fact, won the Victoria Cross, or the Military Cross, I should say, if I'm correct. He has told Britain to prepare for armed conflict with Russia. The Armed Forces Minister, Al Cairns, warning the country was on a war footing, warning that the shadow of war was at Europe's doors. Chilling message comes as Mark Rutte, who is the Secretary General of NATO. He says that its members, including us, of course, including the UK, must prepare for the scale of conflict our grandparents and great-grandparents enjoyed. That's a lovely message coming up to Christmas, isn't it? There is so much to discuss in all of this. Also, the fact that on immigration, a Euro court is pushing back against the tougher immigration rules. This is Keir Starmer, who says that he wants immigration rules. He says that he wants the European Convention on Human Rights to be changed, to be moved in some way. And he is saying that this is something that the European Convention on Human Rights can actually be changed to do, so that we can deport more asylum seekers. This comes, of course, as he has appointed 25 more lords to the House of Lords. There's a lot of consternation about that. The cronies of Keir's cronies in the House of Lords as the hereditary peers go. I know this is something John in Newcastle wants to talk about. He's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. John, first call of the day. You're very, very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Yes, well, I'm going on 80 now, 80 years old, and I've always been against the idea of the undemocratic House of Lords. Democracy. So
was Keir Starmer. So was Keir Starmer until 2022. He said it was unjustifiable to have a House of Lords. He's changed his tune, hasn't he?
Yes, and so the Liberals too. Their policy is that they don't want a House of Lords, but they've always had people in the House of Lords.
They've just got three more of them. They've just got 3 more of them, John.
Yeah. Well, sadly to say, Our country's in a massive disgrace and a mess. I mean, we've got people who go to prisons, prison officers. They're not even British. Some of them can't even speak English. I've been told recently of somebody that the child goes to a high school and they can't understand the ruddy teacher. So it's a fantasy island, this, you see.
Well, there's a big problem, John, with those prison officers that you mentioned as well, because they're bringing in people on work visas because they can't get enough prison officers. They're bringing in people on work visas, and more recently the Home Office is raising the amount of money you need to come in, the amount of money you need to earn to come in, and that's higher than a prison officer's salary. So that's going to be problematic for the prison service even further.
And the reality is, of course, after decades, well, I was born and bred Labour, and I certainly wouldn't be anymore after even the last time they were in power. They left a note saying there's nothing left in the bank. And then we'll have the farcical Tories came in and made a mess of things. And now we're back to the situation is where we're in a big mess, and I think we are really in a big mess. People have took their money out of this country, not millionaires, but some of them even billionaires. And then they wonder why taxes are going to go up, the people of this country.
Well, exactly. I mean, John, do you think there's anybody who can rescue us? Is there a political party? Is there a politician you see that can rescue us from this?
Well, the only one I can understand is Farage. People say, oh, he's a rich man, he doesn't care. No, well, Tony Blair was a Labour man, and he's a millionaire.
He's a rich man now. And actually, just because you're rich doesn't mean you don't care. In fact, many rich people want to preserve their money and want other people to be rich too. I don't know about you, John. I'm a capitalist. I want people to make as much money as they can. I don't want to keep people poor. If people can earn more money, I want them to do so. If they can get promotions, if they can invest money and make money, well, good for them. I think they should be patted on the back, not looked at as, oh, you're a millionaire or a billionaire, you're a bad person. Some of them have worked very hard.
Right. I quite agree with you. Many years ago, I might have had a difference of opinion there, but nowadays I quite understand that if everybody takes their money out, then we're in a mess, and that's basically what's happening here. And we're putting up, it's just going to put up taxes. I don't trust these people in power at the present time. And the Mother of Parliaments, what a joke. What a joke to say we're the Mother of Parliaments relating to the world when we have an undemocratic house which is bigger than the democratic house. And so therefore I'm 100%. And not having a reform person put in there just shows you the contempt. And I've always believed myself for many years as well. They have a contempt for their own breed here, and our own people. We can look after foreigners totally much better than we can people.
And so many people feel that's the case, John. So many people feel that the people born here, the indigenous British population, is just not looked after to the same degree. There's so many people who live a better life, whether they're here legally or not, than so many people who have been here. And of course, there are legal migrants who make a huge contribution to our country. There are people born here who are second, third generation migrants who make a huge contribution. There are people who have come here legally who do that. I have no time for illegal migration myself and people who arrive on our shores illegally. John, listen, thanks for your thoughts this morning. That's John in Newcastle there. I want to speak to James Mathewson, former Labour Party spokesman, about the big political issues of the day. James, you're very welcome to the programme. Good morning.
Good morning, Peter.
Tell me your thoughts on what Al Carnes has said. He's not the most typically Labour politician, but he is someone who has served our country very, very bravely, won the Military Cross, and he has said that we need to prepare for war with Russia.
Yeah, scary times, and I'm sure anybody who hears this will be alarmed. You know, it's always this kind of concern when people hear these, these warnings from people who should be in the know.
And it's Mark Rutte as well, the NATO chief as well. I mean, these are two very serious people we should be taking seriously. What do you think?
Exactly, yeah. These are people who would know. You know, these are the people who would know we should be on this kind of footing. And it should be no surprise to anyone, really. And I do think it is a big frustration of mine politically, as somebody on the left especially, that there is this kind of nonchalantness when it comes to Russia and to our defence often, you know, that it seems to be something that's outdated and old-fashioned to be kind of, you know, concerned about our safety when it comes to this. But it's a very current issue, and it's very real. It is a very real threat. I work with companies who are in the tech space, defence space. And I know that people are often tailed by Russian agents still in that space. I know people who've been, kind of hacked by Russian agents. So it's still a big
and that's
threat.
interesting in itself, James, because you have not just the let's not call it old-fashioned, but certainly the traditional military threat of things like nuclear war, invasion, what's happening in Ukraine, for example, but you also have the cyber threat as well, and that's something that a lot of people are very worried about.
Yeah, exactly. And it just shows how these things develop and how these threats do change over time. And it is something that takes a while to wrap your head around, because you often think to yourself, well, what's in it for Russia? This is such an old kind of grudge, and it's an old way of doing things. But Russia is a very complicated country. It's a fascinating country as well. And I often, my heart bleeds for the people of Russia and what they've been through, and under the leadership of Putin especially. Yeah. But yeah, it is something that we need to be aware of.
We'll talk more about this and about Ukraine with Maester Gifford in a few minutes' time. He's a former British volunteer with the Ukrainian army. For the meantime, James, I just want to ask you about Keir Starmer's attempts to reform the European Convention on Human Rights. We know that a number of those countries appear to agree with the fact that there needs to be some change to the ECHR, but will it be enough? And to me, there are just so many echoes of David Cameron saying, let's change the EU. Obviously, the ECHR and EU are two separate things. But it strikes me that an attempt will be made. It probably won't be successful. And then the Conservatives, and probably more potently, Nigel Farage, will sweep in and say, well, we're going to withdraw from it. And that's going to solve many problems.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really fair comparison to make, Peter, because it does hark back to that David Cameron time, thinking that it would be enough to tackle this. Look, people, I'm not in support of leaving the ECHR myself. I mean, it probably won't be surprised to hear that, but I do think that a Labour government who is being pulled from pillar to post and who doesn't seem to have their own backbone is well kind of being led down the path, if you like, by the likes of Nigel Farage in this endeavour. I don't know anybody in the Labour Party who genuinely wants to leave the ECHR because of their own accord or their own belief. It's only because of the political kind of headwinds, if you like. They want to do this because they want to try and head off the likes of Nigel Farage.
Well, I think quite a few members of our audience, our viewers and listeners, who want to withdraw for the ECHR for very straightforward reasons. That it is the European human rights legislation that so many legal cases are made based on, and they feel that it's not because Nigel Farage tells them that. It's because they feel it themselves.
No, I'm sure they do, but it's not a progressive argument in my mind, I'm afraid. The ECHR is something that is very important, and if you find yourself on the opposite side of the tracks to human rights lawyers, you're normally in violation of human rights.
Not necessarily. I mean, there are lots of reasons that human rights law, I would argue anyway. I'm not against human rights. I'm not against the right to privacy. I'm not against the right to a family life. I'm not against the principles of human rights. But what I am for a British Bill of Rights, where we say what our own rights are and aren't dictated to by a foreign court, by other countries, and by the case law that says that, for example, yes, these are extreme examples, but they're what people see day and daily about a paedophile who says he has to stay in this country because he has a right to a family life, for example. I mean, there is no doubt, James, that the European Convention on Human Rights has been used to keep bad people in this country.
Of course it has. Everything has a flip side like that, Peter. Every kind of law, law is not something...
But it's such a big flip side that so many people feel that the ECHR just isn't worth it. Can you not see their arguments?
I can understand that argument. I can see it. I just believe that the net benefits and the net positives still remain being a member of the ECHR. And unfortunately, we are part of that organisation. We are part of the kind of glue that's held it together for so many years, of course, post-World War II. This was such an important institution, and it's something that has kept more people safe than it has kept that it's caused problems.
I would argue it hasn't kept pace with its original idea, and like so many of those very good ideas in 1951, I mean, Churchill was involved with this, the establishment of it. It hasn't kept pace with what its original mission would be. But listen, let's leave that for another time. Just before you go, let me ask you about Dulwich College, which is Nigel Farage's former school. It says the claims of racism against him, which he denies, are, as they put it, profoundly distressing.
Yeah, they are profoundly distressing. And by the way, anybody who says that they're not or who isn't taking this seriously, I think really needs to listen to the victims and the people who, and these
Well,
people
they say they're victims. He says he didn't say it.
Oh, great, yeah, of course he does. He's a liar. He's a known liar. There is nothing.
I'm sure he would deny that, and I'm sure he would say.
He would deny that.
He has categorically said that he did not say these things.
Brilliant. Well, I don't trust Nigel Farage as far as I could throw him, unfortunately. But I'm sure he would say the same about me. The problem is, with people like Nigel Farage, he will say anything at any time to get out of paying, consequences. I believe people who have no axe to grind, who have no motive, no benefit to them coming forward other than the harassment and abuse that they'll get. I know what it feels like to speak out against Nigel Farage and his supporters. Just yesterday, a debate that I did on talkTV, I've had 2 death threats via email from people who are saying that Nigel Farage is our best hope.
Well, you absolutely. Nobody should be contacting you with those sorts of sentiments. If they contact you and say, James, I disagree with you, that's fine. But that sort of thing is horrendous, and I'm sorry to hear it, James.
There is vitriol surrounding this man and a huge amount of aggression. I get called a white traitor. I get called a race traitor. I'm not just saying that Nigel Farage is racist here, but I am saying that every racist wants Nigel Farage as their Prime Minister.
I don't think that's true. I mean, for example, there are people who are very much against Nigel Farage and see him as a traitor, who are even further to the right than him. So I don't think that quite stands up. But James, I'm sorry to hear you had that treatment. That should not happen. By all means, disagree. By all means, give me a ring and say you disagree with James. Don't be sending him things like that, because that is horrendous, and I totally condemn that. I've been in the receiving end of some of it myself, and it is absolutely not okay. James, thank you very much for joining us this morning. It's James Mathewson, former Labour Party spokesman. What do you think of what he said? Give me a shout. 0344 499 1000. We're going to talk about that war with Russia and what's happening with Ukraine as well in just a second. Stay with us here on Talk.
We need to have a conversation about class in this country and not about the colour of your skin.
It's the Harris playbook, right? They have Beyonce, we've got Lenny Henry.
Little Lily would rather have a Lip Smackers lip gloss from aisle 3 of Target than a freaking whatever that ball roller was that Meghan was so proud of herself about.
We've become such a soft touch that our system is so easy to kind of work around and take advantage of.
Girl, you might be able to earn some money quickly, but no one's going to marry you.
Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to this person who says, Peter, I'm not a Farage fan or a Reform UK member, but for the left to keep dragging up his school days and what he may have said is lazy, it's really lazy. We all said things in the 1970s that would send the woke into a tailspin today, but it was 50 years ago. I totally agree with that. The context has changed, but similarly, there is no world and no time when saying Hitler was right, which he's accused of saying, and he denies, I should say, he denies saying all of this. There's no context in which that was all right, whether it was 50 years ago or not. Geordie Armani says, so James thinks everyone who supports Reform UK is racist. No, he didn't say that. He doesn't think that. That is not what James Mathewson said. You need to stop having him on the show. That's derogatory. That's not what he said, Geordie. If you go back and listen, he said there's vitriol around Nigel Farage and some supporters. He didn't say all of them. So we need to be absolutely accurate in all of that, especially when it comes to people like James Mathewson, who, yes, I profoundly disagree with on many, many levels, but he's a good guy. He comes in this programme, and him getting death threats, or indeed anybody getting death threats who appears in these programmes, I've had them myself, not okay, not nice, not reasonable, not a reasonable way to disagree. You can disagree agreeably. You can give us a ring, 0344 499 1000, and you can get your point across in a reasonable way, because we disagree without being disagreeable on my programmes. Thank you to Elisa in Chelmsford as well. He says, good morning, Peter. Good morning, Elisa. Declaring UNRWA a terrorist organisation cannot come soon enough as far as I'm concerned. This is the United States considering the UN aid agency in Gaza a terrorist organisation, which I think is absolutely correct. Elisa says all the haters, especially the keffiyeh-wearing so-called pro-Palestinians, will crawl under their rocks while the truth emerges about everything they lied about and all the propaganda they spread. No doubt we'll have seen that a majority of so-called journalists were actually terrorists. Yes, and I was saying that right throughout the last couple of years, and I was pilloried for it. The baby formula Israel was accused of withholding was actually found hidden by Hamas. Yeah, we covered that yesterday, Elisa. Absolutely shameful. There's so many horror stories to follow. Slowly the truth will out, and Elisa, you're absolutely right, and I think a number of people will be absolutely vindicated, just as, for example, Nicole Lampert has been on the fact that she believed that West Midlands Police were lying about the effects and the reasons why that Maccabi Tel Aviv match was called off. By the way, in Stuttgart, Maccabi Tel Aviv, the Israeli team, played last night. Absolutely no arrests, no problem, everything was fine. Could the problem perhaps have been the Islamists who don't like Jews? Maybe that was the reason things were problematic in Birmingham, and maybe West Midlands Police should tell us the truth. Let's talk about another conflict now. This is Ukraine and Russia. Mark Rutte, the NATO chief, saying prepare for war with Russia, and one of the defence ministers saying that Britain must stop relying on the US for defence. Let's get the view of Maester Gifford. Maester is a former British volunteer with the Ukrainian army. Maester, thank you for joining me this morning. What do you make of this?
Well, I think it's absolutely right that we should be preparing for a large-scale war somewhere on this planet. I think we've really sort of underinvested in the military over the last sort of 20 years, and we've allowed them to shrink, and the capabilities to shrink as well. And we need to recognise that Russia is on our doorstep. It's rearming. It's building something like 200 tanks per year, and they've invaded Ukraine. And they've said in the past, or Vladimir Putin has said, that the loss of the Soviet Empire was one of the greatest tragedies to ever sort of hit the world.
But Maester, we're 3 years into, we're 3 years into this conflict. We're 3 years into the Ukraine war. He has taken, tragically and dreadfully, a fifth of Ukraine. He hasn't taken all of Ukraine. There's been no serious effort to take over Kyiv. There have been, of course, horrible bombs there. There has been a feint where they sent troops there to some degree, but he hasn't taken over Ukraine. And I worry that there is a lot of saber rattling by people who are saying that he's going to take over Ukraine, then he's going to take over Western Europe. I mean, there's no evidence to suggest that.
No, he absolutely wanted to take all of Ukraine. And
he may want to, but he hasn't done it so far, and he hasn't shown the capability to do it.
Sorry. Right at the beginning of the war, he attacked Kyiv, tried to take Kyiv. I was there, I was on the ground.
On field.
There was 20,000 Russian troops, and you're right, he failed. Because of, I've said in the past, Russia's relied on sort of general winter to protect themselves from the attacks of Napoleon and Hitler and all the rest of it. In northern Ukraine, it was a major mistake that saved Ukraine. The bravery of their people and the timely intervention of the West really helped them resist Russia. But it was actually really the Russians completely underestimating them and not being able to take Kyiv. There was a serious attack. They wanted Kyiv. They wanted all of Ukraine. And they were defeated in Kyiv. That's why the war now is confined to the east of the country, and it has run into a stalemate. You're absolutely right. Now, 1.5 million people have been killed and injured in this conflict so far. A lot of people have died. If they made a serious attack on the Baltics or any other country on this planet, this war a future war could be just as bloody, just as violent.
Well, yes, but again, I have to ask you, Macer, where is the evidence that that can happen? Because it hasn't happened so far.
What's happened in Ukraine? Ukraine's a perfect example.
But only 1/5 of the country. But only 1/5 of the country is under Russian control.
Just because they've failed so far does not mean they're not a threat. They wanted all of Ukraine. There is serious
evidence. But if they haven't taken that, but Macer, my point is, if they haven't done that in 3 years, where they may want to, they may have huge imperial ambitions. They may want the whole of the Soviet Union back. And I'm not disagreeing with you that is the view that Putin has, the ideology that he has. But does he have the capability? Because he's been fighting for 3 years and he's only taken 1/5 of Ukraine. That's a horrible, dreadful, tragic war. He is an evil, murderous dictator. I'm not on his side. I'm just wondering where the evidence is that he may want to, but can he take either all of Ukraine or go into further Western Europe or indeed attack the UK?
Well, honestly, there's many ways that he could impact the UK. The UK, we are protected. We've got Europe between us and Russia. We are an island nation. We're never going to have an invasion force landing on our shores anytime soon. However, there is hybrid war. There is attacks on our infrastructure that Russia could do. Russia has already attacked us in many ways. There's been 2 chemical attacks on British streets.
Mm-hmm.
The last one killed a British citizen and wounded 3 more. One of them was a police officer who nearly died. Now, any other nation on this planet, if they had done that to us, we would quite rightly turn around and say that's a terror nation. And Russia, which in the last 3 years has invaded Ukraine, the invasion force was 200 and something thousand strong, which is completely under-resourced. It was ridiculous that he thought he could take all of Ukraine with that amount of people. But it shows you how deluded Vladimir Putin was. He was incredibly isolated during the COVID years. The very famous images of him sitting 20 meters away from the nearest person got him thinking that he could genuinely take all of Ukraine very easy. In fact, he said it would take 3 days. It was said many times.
I remember that, and it sort of comes back again to my key point, which is he may have the ambition, he may have the delusional belief that he can do that, but certainly we are underprepared. I get that point. We don't have the military resources we should have. And defence of the realm is the #1 duty of any government. And you talk about those poisonings, for example, the Salisbury poisoning and others. I think back to the first story I covered as a professional journalist, the Alexander Litvinenko poisoning 20 years ago, for example. I covered that for Newsnight. I mean, those are horrendous things, but they affected a very, very small number of people. And I still wonder where the evidence is that he wants to take over all of the UK and that we should be sitting worried about Vladimir Putin taking over our country.
He's not going to take over our country. As I said, we've got there's no country on this planet that could take the UK. In regards to its threats to the UK,
you don't think the United States could if it wanted to? I mean, it's not going to, but it could.
Not even the United States, but that's a separate conversation. But in regards to the serious threats to the UK, if there was an invasion of the Baltic nations, then we are. Because of our NATO commitments, we would have to respond. And at the moment, we've got 82,000 people in our military. Our kit is it is woefully inadequate for the battles of the future. And more importantly, we can't create mass or scale to the military quickly, particularly if there were two fronts opened up at the same time. If, for example, the Russians were to, let's say, invade one of the Baltic nations, and China was to invade Taiwan, or Iran was going to close the Straits of Hormuz, then what is Britain going to do to defend our interests, to make sure trade keeps flowing? We are a maritime nation, we are a trading nation, and what happens in the rest of the world greatly impacts us. And so when we are dealing with Ukraine, the Baltic countries, and saying we're going to defend them, we are defending ourselves by proxy. So it is absolutely important that we invest in ourselves. We have a robust and determined foreign policy that challenges our geopolitical enemies. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea are our geopolitical enemies. Do not allow anyone to tell you different. They wish to harm the United Kingdom. They want to weaken our power, and they want to erode our defences. We need to strengthen ourselves to stop that.
Okay, thank you, Maester. That's Maester Gifford there, former British volunteer with the Ukrainian Army. Quite a number of voice notes coming in about this. I want to hear from Shirley. She sent me one. You can do this very easily. Just send it through WhatsApp, 0344 499 1000. Keep them to less than a minute, and we'll get as many of them on as we can between now and 1 o'clock. This is what Shirley has to say.
Peter, I'm not sure where this threat of war is coming from, but they're certainly fanning the flames. I haven't heard Putin on any news at all saying that he's threatening to invade Europe. They did exactly the same when Russia was invading Ukraine. They fanned the flames for months before until it happened. They didn't do anything to try and talk to Putin to stop it happening, and that's exactly what's happening now. Nobody's talking to try and stop it or have a meet-up with Putin to talk this through. They're just war. How can the British people prepare for war? What were we supposed to do? Go and stock up on loo rolls or something? I'm not sure what we're supposed to do. All of the European leaders are weak and pathetic, and God help us if we ever go to war with this shower.
Shirley, thank you for that. I agree with a lot of what you said there. I don't see an imminent threat from Russia necessarily, although would Putin actually tell us if he was going to invade? I don't think he is going to invade. I don't think we're on his radar for that particular thing at the moment. He's far too preoccupied with Ukraine. I disagree with a lot of what Maester said, but I'm happy to hear him said because, of course, I'm happy to hear different points of view on this programme, and you can put yours across, as Shirley did, by dialing me or sending me a voice note on 0344 499 1000. You can also send me a WhatsApp text message on that number too. I do think there are efforts, certainly, to stop the war in Ukraine. We know that Zelensky was here on Monday. He's talking to Keir Starmer. He's talking to many other different European nations and the Americans as well. And the Americans are heavily involved in trying to stop the war in Ukraine. So I think there is, Shirley, I think it's perhaps unfair to say there isn't an effort to stop that. When it comes to Russia potentially invading us, I think that you're absolutely right. The things have gone too far too quickly. Maybe you disagree with me on that, and that's okay. 0344 499 1000. We're going to talk about the snowflake generation next. Half of secondary pupils avoiding school due to anxiety. Could it possibly be because we locked them up for 3 years when they were developing their minds, their social skills and all the rest of it? I think it probably could. We'll talk to Tim Clark, who's a former head teacher, next here on Talk, and take your views too. Stay with us.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
I've just had a look on Twitter there during the break. Quite a number of messages coming in, including from Robert Rees, who says, Peter, I find your last guest's opinion, I think he's talking about James Mathewson, quite disgusting, to be honest, but I respect his right to freedom of speech. Unfortunately, those on the left don't show the same respect back, only insults and accusations. There's no place for threats of violence. A Welsh lady says China has thousands of Uyghurs in prison, horrific human rights abuses. They've stated the will to take Taiwan by force. Why are the West not intervening there, I wonder? And Nat, who is in Tel Aviv, says, to say that I generally disagree with James Mathewson would be the understatement of the year, but I do appreciate him having some sympathy with my fellow Russians. Nat lives in Tel Aviv but is Russian. Life back home is fast resembling North Korea in just about every way for the ordinary people, which is heartbreaking to see. I'm not really sure how much worse things can get, though I suppose they've yet to block air. I suppose. Great show. Thank you, Nat, for that. I want to talk now about something that's really concerning, and that is that half of secondary school pupils have avoided school because of anxiety in the past year. The top causes include being asked to speak in front of the class, fear of falling behind, and finding it too difficult to sit still for long periods. Now, secondary school is never that easy. I would honestly say between 12 and 15 was probably the toughest time of my life, especially kind of 13, 14. But I generally went to school most of the time, although I did have quite a bad sickness record because I didn't like school and was just easily taking days off. I remember that. 2,000 secondary school pupils found dozens of concerns that were compelling some to refuse to attend. Girls 1.6 times more likely than boys to miss school because of anxiety. I mean, we've got an anxious generation. These are kids who were in primary school when we locked them down for so many years and refused to bring them to school because of COVID, which wasn't going to kill them. It certainly killed many older people, but it wasn't going to kill them. Let's speak to Tim Clark, who's a former head teacher. I know there were some people, young people, who died of COVID, but they're very, very few and far between. Tim, is this all down to lockdown, or is this down, do you think, to other factors?
Morning, Peter.
Morning, hi.
Can I just say, first of all, I think we need to be slightly cautious of this research. You did mention the researcher questioned 2,000 teenagers from across the UK. There are 9 million pupils in schools in England alone. So I'm not trying to poo-poo it. I'm not suggesting if you did bigger research you wouldn't get a similar response.
That is roughly, I mean, when you do political polls, for example, for the whole of the country, you usually poll about 2,000 people for 70 million. So yeah. I think it's reasonable to suggest that there is at least some form of representation in this. You don't have to eat an entire bowl of soup to know what the soup tastes like.
No, I appreciate it. I'm not trying to poo-poo it, but I do think that needs stating.
Okay.
The second thing, there is no doubt about it that post-COVID, we have seen both a massive decline in school attendance and in pupil behaviour. And just to unpick both of those, we are still seeing almost 1 in 5 kids, I forget it's 17 point something % of kids, are still persistently absent from school. Not a day here or a day there, but persistently absent. And in terms of school behaviour, the latest evidence suggests that over a quarter of schools now, 27%, are blighted by poor behaviour. 20% of schools, poor behaviour, 7% very poor behaviour. Now, you compare that to pre-COVID, those figures were 4% and 1% respectively. 4% poor, 1% very poor. We've gone from 5 to 27%. So there is no doubt about it that post-COVID there has been a decline in behaviour, children not accepting school routines, a growing number of parents, not a majority of parents, but a growing number of parents who don't support schools. And there is no doubt about it that COVID was the watershed.
Yeah, and certainly seeing school as sort of optional as well, seeing it as a thing that actually they don't really need it. It is fascinating to see some of these things like, I mean, all teenagers will be anxious, or many teenagers anyway, will be anxious about pressure, about tests and exams and grades. Show me a teenager or anybody being schooled who isn't anxious about tests, exams and grades. Being asked to speak in front of the class, that's an interesting one as well. I mean, really all people should be should have to do that at some stage. And worrying about how they look, 18%, very interesting in that regard, because of course body image is such a bigger thing. What do we do to try to unpick this? Can we do this? Can we unpick this, or is it just a lost generation, do you think?
No, I think that's a really interesting point, actually, Peter. There are obviously some children who suffer from a very serious medical psychological condition. Anxiety can result in, children wetting the bed, children not being able to sleep, children having suddenly having a higher pulse rate, a panic attack, children having stomach cramps. Anxiety for some children is a very real medical psychological condition, and those children need professional support. But I don't think that's where we're seeing the exponential growth. Where we're seeing the exponential growth is exactly what you've just described. The child saying, I've got a test today, I'm not going in. I've got a detention, I'm not doing that. That's where this has grown. And there will be some people shouting at the screen, no doubt, saying that I'm being very callous and old-fashioned and harsh. But this data does say that the single largest group of those 2,000 children questioned skipped school for less than 1 day a month.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't imply they have some deep-seated psychological medical problem. That's more indicative of exactly what you've just said. They don't like doing a test, or they don't like facing up, they've got in trouble, and so they skip off for the day. And
I'm totally with you in that anxiety is a real thing. I take pills for anxiety every single day. I have for the last 15 years, and it's something that's reviewed all the time. It is an actual medical condition. But simply to feel anxious about a test, that is a perfect, or worried about a test, perfectly normal. Before a job interview or whatever, that is perfectly normal human behaviour, and we need to be really, really careful about over-medicating people.
If we give in to that and say, we've got to remove all pressure from schools, we do kids a disservice.
And we're not preparing them for real life, because real life is tricky. It is a tricky thing.
But I'd also add just the point you were saying about your medication. There is no doubt there is also a problem for those children that really need specialist support. There is a lack of enough professionals, medical professionals, counselling professionals, to actually support those kids. So in no way am I dismissing those children who have very real problems. But I think the majority of kids need to see a return of traditional school routines and traditional discipline.
Lots of common sense there, Tim. Thank you. That's Tim Clark there, former head teacher. I will confess to occasionally having sort of strategically been unwell around the time of, this is so embarrassing, around the time of both the Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition speeches at conferences. I seem to have been unwell at various points during my teenage years when those speeches were there, when Tony Blair or William Hague or whoever were giving their speeches and conference speeches. It's tremendously embarrassing, but shows yet again how geeky I was as a teenager. Thank goodness I've grown out of that. Anyway, we'll be talking in just a second to Simon Calder about Gatwick. This is, of course, one of the biggest airports in the UK. They're announcing a 43% rise in their drop-off fee. You go to Gatwick, you drop someone off so they can go and get their plane. Do you know how much it's going to cost you? £10. £10 for like a few minutes of dropping someone off. It is absolutely crazy, and just shows how these charges are mounting up. This is the highest in the UK, but there's so many different airports right across the country. I think it's £4 or something in Belfast every time my parents drop me off when I'm coming back to London. It is absurd. We'll talk to Simon about that. I want to hear your experiences as well. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
We need to have a conversation about class in this country and not about the colour of your skin.
It's the Harris playbook, right? They have Beyonce, we've got Lenny Henry.
Little Lily would rather have a lip smacker's lip gloss from aisle 3 of Target than a freaking whatever that ball roller was that Meghan was so proud of herself about.
We've become such a soft touch that our system is so easy to kind of work around and take advantage of.
Girl, you might be able to earn some money quickly, but no one's going to marry you.
Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Let's talk now about Gatwick Airport. It is the second biggest airport in Britain, and it has blamed Rachel Reeves for a decision to increase some of its parking charges by more than 40%. If you use the drop-off or pick-off area from the 6th of January, the charge is going to go from £7 to £10, far higher than any other airport. It's blaming business rates which have gone up. Let's speak to travel guru Simon Calder, travel correspondent for The Independent. Simon, what's behind all of this?
Well, if you go back just 5 years, Gatwick didn't have a drop-off charge at all, along with Heathrow. It said, no, we're a big, important airport and you don't need to pay to drop people off. Then, in April 2021, it brought in fees at a £5. They've been going up steadily since, most recently in May this year to £7. And now, well, exactly as you say, they intend to blame the Chancellor, say, look, our business rates have doubled. We got very few options because our charges are regulated, so we can't just say to the airlines, okay, pay us 10% more. So this is what we're going to do. And they also say, and the great thing is that this is going to persuade more people to travel by public transport, which will save the planet. So it's really quite a steep hike, but they say, I guess with some reason, that Gatwick is the best connected of all the British airports. It was actually built next to the London-Brighton Railway specifically so that access to and from Gatwick, particularly from London, would be easy. And now there's trains sort of every 3 or 4 minutes.
Undoubtedly, this will put some people off, certainly bring their cars there, but presumably flying as well. Gatwick have said its business rates in the coming 3 years are going to go from 40 million to 90 million, making it the second highest single site ratepayer in the UK after Heathrow Airport. I mean, much smaller businesses have got in touch with me over the past few days talking about their rates, business rates going up to a huge extent. The economy and Rachel Reeves in particular, the finger will be pointed at her.
Yes, I mean, the airport says that we have very little choice. They point out, of course, that if you've got a blue badge, that you're not going to be charged. And also, if you don't want to pay the fee, then you can drop people off at one of the long-term car parks and then get the shuttle bus. But at 6 o'clock in the morning when it's raining, not many people, I would suggest, would want to do that. And they also say that this is going to help fund better public transport, in particular bus links, which will mean that there's many, many more options. However, the RAC, I think representing pretty well the motoring community, are saying the words Happy New Year are unlikely to be uttered by drivers dropping off friends and family at Gatwick in January. They say that drivers want to drop people off because very often they got huge amounts of luggage. They maybe got kids or frail elderly relatives in tow. The last thing you want is to try to be getting on and off trains and all that malarkey.
Well, absolutely. I feel that way too, certainly when I've been dropping people off myself. There are, just finally, Simon, there are many, many airports that have these charges. I note the owner of Gatwick, that oversees Gatwick anyway, as well as Edinburgh and Belfast airports, on behalf of its shareholders, has put this warning out, the second biggest operational expense. I know from my own experience of both Gatwick and Belfast and London and other airports as well, I mean, these charges are basically everywhere. Presumably there are some airports where they still haven't been implemented yet in the UK.
Very, very few, and none of the major airports. The last airport standing was London City. They still haven't got a charge. This is the Docklands Airport in East London.
It's a great airport.
They're going to introduce one by the end of this month, and they are very much a British thing, these charges.
Yeah.
If you look at what's happening in Europe, across the US, I talk to people coming in and they say, we cannot understand this. How can it's a basic human right to be able to drop off Peter Cardwell at an airport and bid him farewell. So,
I wonder what the ECHR would say about that one. Simon, thank you very much indeed. That's Simon Calder there, who's the travel correspondent of The Independent. Really appreciate you bringing us that story and updating us on it. Lots of people getting in touch about our war footing and where we are with Ukraine and also Russia as well. Dan's been in touch with a voice note. Let's hear from Dan.
I'd roll around on the floor laughing if it wasn't so serious. Go to war with Russia. We have a depleted military. Our industry is in tatters because of net zero and high energy costs. Our economy is collapsed, basically in recession. Yet they want to push for war. And don't get me started on the politicians that called our flag racist when it was hung from lampposts, but will be happy to cheer how brave our soldiers would be carrying it into battle. It's a complete farce.
Listen, thank you very much indeed, Dan. Steve in Yorkshire's given me a ring about this, 0344 499 1000. Steve, what do you make of all of this?
I don't think we should put a single boot on the ground to protect Europe. We did that in the Second World War. Hundreds of thousands of our fellow men died.
We also defeated Nazism, Steve.
Yeah, we did, and I accept that. But the point being is that France and the rest of Europe have treated us with contempt. They never supported us with regards to Brexit and tried to make the thing work. I think, as Dan said, we need to be having a dialogue, I think, with Putin and just not rushing to war because Keir Starmer thinks it's the right thing for us to do.
But if he attacks a NATO country, the principle of NATO, it's only actually ever been invoked once. It's Article 5. If you attack one nation, you attack them all. It was invoked after 9/11. The point is, Steve, that if one NATO nation is attacked, then the rest go there. Ukraine isn't a NATO nation. Should we be in Ukraine? Should we be helping them? There was a soldier the other day who lost his life after an explosion and something went wrong with a test military installation that was being tested there, Steve. Should we be in Ukraine at all? Should we be supporting them, sending them money?
I honestly don't believe we should. I think that our priority is to our British population. We're not looking after them properly at the moment.
The argument though of people though like Mr. Gifford who was on earlier was that actually all of it is at stake there. All of the West is at stake in Ukraine, and if you don't defend Ukraine, well, it'll be a sort of domino effect. I don't agree with that, and I challenged Macer on that. What do you think, Steve?
I don't agree with him either. I think basically that Europe is looking for a war. The whole of Europe is in a recession. They want the Margaret Thatcher moment, and we don't need it. We don't need a war with Russia. And to be quite frank, we haven't got the equipment to do it, or the people. We can't even defend our own shores at the moment. So how are we going to defend the whole of Europe? I really don't know. I just think there are better solutions to this problem, and one of them is talking with Putin. And I'm not saying that he's not an evil dictator, he is, but we can't go to war with him.
I don't want a war with Russia. I want to do everything to avoid it, but I also don't want to be weak, and I also don't want to be an appeaser. And as I'm sure you don't either, Steve.
I don't. I actually feel quite sorry. Obviously it's horrific what's happened in Ukraine, and Putin is a madman. There's no two ways about it. But I also feel I have lots of Russian friends, and I also feel sorry for their friends and family who are really suffering in Russia as well.
Oh, you're absolutely right. The Russians, similar to the Israelis and the many attacks that people have on them, you're absolutely right. The Russian people are no more responsible for what Vladimir Putin is doing than you or I are responsible for what Keir Starmer does.
I just feel if we put British boots on the ground in force in Ukraine, it will be Armageddon, and there's no other word for it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I think it will be.
Steve, I think I agree with you, and I appreciate that. Steve, thank you. Nick in Horsham has sent me a message to say, Peter, it's great to hear you on the radio, bringing some common sense to this mad and crazy world that we find ourselves in. Thank you, Nick. This new threat from Russia being bandied around is nothing more than an exercise to keep the good population of this country, and indeed the peoples of Europe, under threat of fear. A population that is fearful and scared is far easier to control by their own government, in Nick's view. And Ray in Liverpool says, Maester Gifford is correct. This country needs to wake up to the threat from Russia. They may not invade anytime soon, but they're already trying to weaken and cause chaos in Europe. Who do you think is behind the mass illegal migration of people from Africa and Asia, says Ray. Well, thank you to everybody who has been in touch. We'll take more of your calls, texts, tweets and voice notes in the next hour. We're going to get some common sense from Trevor Kavanagh, the former political editor of The Sun. He'll be talking to us in just a second about all the big political issues of the day. We'll take more of your calls. As I say, the number is 0344 499 1000. You can ring me on that number, or you can send me a WhatsApp text message, or you can send me a voice note as well. More of those in the next hour. Stay with us.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good morning. This is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company this Friday. I'm here today, tomorrow and Sunday between 10 and 1, and so much to talk about during that time. We'll talk to Trevor Kavanagh in a second, the political journalist, former political editor of The Sun. There's so much to discuss. Whether we are on the brink of a war with Russia, the NATO chief certainly thinks so, and one of our defence ministers thinks we need to prepare for that as well. Euro court bosses pushing back against tougher immigration rules, fresh calls for Britain to quit the ECHR. That's what the Conservatives and Reform UK would like us to do. We'll talk this hour as well about Israel and the US government considering labelling UNRWA, the aid agency, a foreign terrorist organisation. I would totally support that. And the flu surge, because the NHS says all the time, every year, oh, this has come up and shocked us and it's unprecedented. Well, it's only unprecedented because it's a week earlier this year. Surely this should be an organisation that is braced for that, given that they know it's coming every single winter. So much to discuss. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me at 72222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a voice note, less than a minute, please. You can send me a WhatsApp text message or give me a ring, all on the main number 0344 499 1000. So much to discuss between now and 1 o'clock. Stay with us here on Talk. Well, I'm delighted Trevor Kavanagh is with me, and Trevor, there's so much to discuss, including the big story about Al Cairns, the Defence Minister, saying we need to prepare for war with Russia, echoing the sentiments of Mark Rutte, who is the head of NATO. What do you think?
Good morning, Peter.
Morning.
Well, I think that we are in a difficult situation because there's no doubt that Putin is unreliable and an aggressive character, and he sees us in the West as weak and dilatory, and were he to have the opportunity, he would take advantage of it. And the countries that border Russia and were formerly part of the USSR are feeling extremely vulnerable and in his targets at the moment, in his sights. So the best way of stopping him, as I think Mark Rutte would say, and so should our own defense secretary, the only way to stop him is to have a strong defense of our own, a strong military, a military which will deter and prevent him from taking that fatal step. I think the big problem is that people are frightened that he's so mad. Vlad is that mad that he would use his nuclear weapons. I doubt if that's true, but I think that he would try to bully those border countries like Lithuania and Poland and other countries very close to the Russian border.
Well, Trevor, there's an awful lot that people are talking about in regard to our relations with other European countries as well. Unsurprisingly, there's some consternation from European human rights court bosses in Strasbourg, for example, and others pushing back against the tougher immigration rules that Keir Starmer says he wants to bring in. He says he wants to reform the ECHR from within. Some nations agree with him, but not all of them. It could be done on a majority vote. But actually, from our perspective, do you think withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights because of the many spurious ways in which it is used would actually be a better option?
Well, I think it is this very weakness of the European Union to come to any sort of majority decision on almost anything, which is the provocation to people like Putin to test our resilience. And it seems to me that the European Union is at odds with just about everybody who lives within the European Union borders. All of the citizens of Europe are in uproar over the flood of the tidal wave of immigration, which is, as the American President Donald Trump is suggesting, is transforming the culture of the European Union. And
he is actually saying as well, as I'm sure you've seen, that 4 separate nations he thinks should withdraw from the EU as the UK has done.
Well, I think that would be a very healthy first step, and I hope that others would follow. If they were to leave, I think that it would cast a doubt over the future of an already wobbly European Union, which has, I think, proved to have been unfit for the job it's taken upon its shoulders to develop, and they are not looking after the European people properly. If they're not defending them properly, that is their first duty, and as far as I can see, it's only because Donald Trump has promised to withdraw the sort of financial and military support that is the keystone of NATO that we're suddenly beginning to think about actually stepping up our own spending.
But do you think it's likely that Austria, Italy, Hungary and Poland will move closer to the American orbit away from the EU and actually withdraw? I mean, it's a huge thing to do, as we've found in this country ourselves.
I think sadly the answer is no, Peter. I mean, for a start, Hungary is quite close to Russia, or at least the Russian president. I think that the step for a country like Austria, which is really just dependent on Germany, France isn't going to leave anytime soon. So I think these are fond hopes. I do think, though, that an awful lot of countries in the European Union are looking very much askance at Brussels and the way they're running the shop. But they seem to have no voice, because without a majority, for instance, on the question of modifying the ECHR, it's never going to happen. So this is most unsatisfactory for millions and millions of people who have no say in the matter.
Closer to home, let's talk about the benefits bill, because we know the number of people claiming universal credit for health reasons has rocketed by 1 million in just a year. We see those figures from about GDP, about what the country makes. This morning, the economy contracting by 0.1%. Yes, they can be revised and so on, but the growth that Labour bet the farm on as it went into the 2024 election has eluded them quite significantly, has it not?
It has, and could it possibly be that the economic policies of this government in the space of that 1 year have had something to do with that? I think that it's almost entirely due to this tendency to take money out of the pockets of hardworking people and squander them across the welfare state. The benefits street budget has demonstrated that we're happier to spend money on people who are not working than to help those who are.
I wonder whether you think that Labour can actually get a grip of this, especially given all the problems that Keir Starmer has with his backbenches and indeed his frontbenches. People like Wes Streeting, for example, saying in an interview yesterday that he felt it was a sort of technocratic government that solved problems as they came along, that it perhaps had, I mean, he didn't say this, but I always think of Gromit in Wallace and Gromit when he's on the little train and he's putting the track down to actually sort of go along in the train, and that seems to be the way the government is dealing with problems, is literally as they are in front of them and they have to deal with it immediately rather than thinking a few steps ahead. What do you think?
Well, the answer to your first question, do I think that this government can deal with it? The answer is a flat, unequivocal no. And it has no inclination to deal with it. It is the tail that's wagging the dog of this government is the left wing, the socialist wing of the party. And Keir Starmer is petrified of the inevitable, which is that he's going to be defenestrated, chucked out of the window, either between now and the next local elections or immediately afterwards. So his fate is sealed. It's only a question of who takes over. Would it be Wes Streeting? Well, I suppose he has a chance. But he too would be at odds with those people. Despite all the help that he's getting from Alistair Campbell and Tony Blair, I think he would still be at odds with those people on the left who want a socialist Britain.
Although just last night, 2 nights ago, Shabana Mahmood appeared to have some support from Tony Blair as well. He did an event that she was part of in Westminster. I wonder if you think that she is more likely to be the successor to Keir Starmer, or maybe it's someone we haven't thought of. Maybe it's Angela Rayner, maybe it's someone else.
Well, I thought that the moment that she was appointed Home Secretary that she was in with a chance. And I think that she would have very strong credentials if, by the time there is a leadership contest, some impact is being made on the rate of illegal immigration in particular, and also on crime generally, law and order in the streets and so on. I mean, the reform of the police is an interesting start. The trouble for her is that she doesn't have much time to deliver the results that she clearly needs to do before being a serious contender. But she does have considerable support, and I wouldn't rule her out.
Do you feel that Kemi Badenoch, perhaps, given some better performances in PMQs, is getting better? Do you think she's more of a chance now, or are the Tories just finished, given the dominance and leading in the polls? Although it does seem to have settled down a little bit recently over Reform UK.
Well, I think that actually Kemi is beginning to form as people hoped she would much sooner, but never too late in these sort of circumstances. And although the polls aren't showing a surge, they are showing an improvement. And she's getting quite a lot of media coverage, social media coverage, and indeed op-eds in all of the right-of-centre newspapers, including The Sun. So I do think, actually, that she is beginning to get some traction. And part of this improvement is the fact that Nigel Farage, despite the opinion polls showing him way ahead, is beginning to come under close scrutiny on a variety of subjects, not just the policies that he would introduce as a prime minister if he won government, but also over his years at Dulwich College and the things he said and did there.
Yeah, they say that they are worried about it, profoundly distressing. Do you think that we should take those things seriously? I mean, it was 49 years ago, and he denies saying what quite a number of people say that he did say at the time.
Well, I think that an awful lot of people will take them seriously, and I think they need to be taken seriously, because if they are accurately portrayed as the remarks he made at the time, even though he was only 17, and we're all stupid at 17, I have to admit, that's pretty serious stupidity. So, I mean,
I think it was 13 actually, but either way, he was a very young man and barely out of childhood, certainly.
I thought it was a bit later than 13, but I'll leave that. I'll accept your view. But you know, if it was 13, well, I think that genuinely is so young. It's not. He's not responsible for that sort of. I mean, the age of responsibility doesn't start until 16. So give him the benefit of the doubt on that. But if it was later in his years and is proven to be true, then I think that has serious implications. For the moment, I think he's getting the benefit of the doubt, and perhaps he deserves it. So let's wait and see.
Trevor, we've been talking quite a lot about school days today, just at various points during the programme, and I can honestly say that the 15-year-old schoolboy Peter is incredibly jealous of 41-year-old Peter, who actually gets paid money to talk to Trevor Kavanagh. It is always a privilege to hear your views, and thank you for them. That is Trevor Kavanagh there, the former political editor of The Sun. What do you think about what he said, 0344 499 1000, on Russia attacking the UK? Matthew in Cheshire has given me a ring on that number. Matthew, what would you like to say?
Peter, we have a thing called NATO. That's our insurance. So obviously, Russia won't attack the United Kingdom, not directly. It might be attacking us through cyber and, you know, electronically and Bitcoin and banks and all that, but it won't. I served when the back end of the Cold War in 92, 93, 94. I do think there will be another Cold War. There's got to be, because the threat of Russia.
Is it happening at the moment, perhaps?
I think it is slowly happening. You know, I still follow my regiment, and although it's fundamentally a lot of things have changed, my regiment seems to be making the most of what they've got with the equipment they've got. When I served, we didn't even have any rounds to go live firing during the 90s, the 80s and 90s. We, you know, the only problem we've got now is we give all our stock away to Ukraine.
Yeah.
So if we did get another conflict...
And many people feel, Matthew, that was a mistake in itself, given the level of preparedness we have. Others saying, well, actually, things are at stake in Ukraine, and if Ukraine falls, there could be this domino effect. I don't believe that's going to be the case. I wonder what you think.
I don't think it'll be the case, but don't forget, you've got NATO countries that are aligned with Ukraine, and the wars will go up. You know, Russia isn't the power that it makes out. You know, the battleships are going down the English Channel and around the English waters, and they're breaking down, and there's black smoke from it. You know, they don't want to go to war. The Russian people don't want to go to war. You know, they've got a despot of a dictator, of a leader who's, you know, at the end of his career, most probably. He's nearly 80 now.
Yeah.
And he might get overthrown by the Russians or the oligarchs, because, you know, we've just took billions off them. So there's more of a different kind of warfare than what there used to be, where it's trenches and battlefields. It's political, it's cyber. But we need to build, you know, we've got more legal immigrants have come in this country this year than the size of our armed forces. We can fit our armed forces with space in Wembley Arena.
Yeah, listen,
and that's frightening.
You're absolutely right, Matthew. First of all, thank you for your service to this country, and we've looked it up. Putin is a mere slip of a lad at 73, but he will be 80 in 7 years' time. Thank you to Deborah, who says we should never have got to the stage with the threat of widespread war in Europe. We knew Putin was going to invade Ukraine when he put 200,000 troops on the border and built 2 field hospitals, and yet we did nothing. Now we are paying the price of our inaction. We could end up with young British men and women dying on the battlefield, says Deborah. Trevor says, good morning, Peter. Good morning, Trevor. There's only one threat to the UK at present, that is Starmer's very cosy and suspect relationship with China. If you're preparing for a war, you don't give away sovereign territory and pay the country that is close to your enemy for the privilege of it. Lots more messages and thoughts and opinions coming your way. I want to hear yours too on 0344 499 1000. We're talking about that issue of migration in just a second. We'll also see footage of a lorry full of migrants sparking motorway chaos as cops detained 14 people. Stay with us here on Talk.
We need to have a conversation about class in this country and not about the colour of your skin.
It's the Harris playbook, right? They have Beyonce, we've got Lenny Henry.
Little Lily would rather have a lip smacker's lip gloss from aisle 3 of Target than a freaking whatever that ball roller was that Meghan was so proud of herself about.
We've become such a soft touch that our system is so easy to kind of work around and take advantage of.
Girl, you might be able to earn some money quickly, but no one's going to marry you.
Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Mark in Portsmouth, who says, "Good morning, young man." Mark, very good morning to you. You can call me a young man anytime you like. Russia is not capable of mounting a sustained attack on Western Europe. Poland, Germany, France and the UK are more than capable of stopping Russia in its tracks on the eastern front. Even Finland, Sweden and Norway are capable of stopping an advance on the northern flank. But as the old saying goes, if you want peace, prepare for war. Quite a lot on James Mathewson a little bit earlier on. Gary has said, "Morning, Peter. Of course, James does not like Nigel Farage. He dislikes everything Nigel and Reform stand for because at heart he is far left. I'm sorry to hear about him receiving death threats, which should never happen. Just bear in mind, no one in the political sphere at the moment receives more vitriol and hate than Nigel Farage. But even though he really does not need to, he keeps going. I disagree with James on Nigel's motives. I believe he only has this nation's best interests at heart." Lots of other messages. Jackie says, "We will not go to war. Sorry Starmer will just sell us to the highest bidder. Kez says being asked to talk in front of a class in a state school, 30+ classmates may not be invested in learning. Private schools, smaller classes of 15-ish classmates, more positive about learning. Big difference. Great show. Thanks, Kez. Just me, says Peter. Seriously, what has Britain got that would inspire Putin to want? Take a long look at the country. We have nothing left. Our motivation is gone. Our patriotism is gone. And our self-respect is disappearing. The globalists have won. It's over. Abe says the sabre rattling from the left and EU regarding Russia is their plan to create their own European army controlled by non-elected elitists. This was part of the post-World War II plan. And London Oil Trader says, remember the David Lammy who gave money to UNRWA after UNRWA was brought into question regarding its links to Hamas? I do remember that. We reported it at the time. It was horrendous. And he also says, or she also says, Dulwich College needs to come out and state that it either holds or does not hold Nigel Farage reports and files, and if the file is held, is being checked for any reports of racism being stated against him. Lady Anne says, I would trust Nigel Farage 100 times over James Mathewson. James can spew plenty of vitriol himself. He's a hypocrite. Another person says, the ECHR was created to enable human rights in fascist Europe after World War II. Britain signed up to help Europe, not for help. Well, interestingly, the ECHR, of course, is at the centre of the asylum debate as well, and we've seen the 2 young Afghan asylum seekers were free to roam the streets for a month after they admitted raping a 15-year-old schoolgirl in a park. There are many, many other aspects to this, as well as the fact, and we'll talk about that in a second, but there are many aspects to this, including Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, trying to get some change to the ECHR. Tony Smith is the former head of the UK Border Force. Tony, good morning to you. I just wonder if you think that the ECHR tinkering can actually help.
No, I don't, Peter, frankly. I don't think it's going to help because it's going to require the agreement of 49 countries, and I think there are too many vested interests in the ECHR and in the European Court for that to be achieved. It will be a prolonged debate. I'm not surprised the government are saying that's what their line is, but I would much prefer a position that's been announced recently by other politicians that we should leave that as soon as we possibly can. We have to give notice of that and then fundamentally reform our asylum system. I think that's the only way we've got a real chance of getting to grips with the problems we have on illegal migration at the moment.
I just want to play 2 things. I'll describe it with the first one for people who are listening on the radio, which is the majority of people who watch and listen to this programme. And this is, if we just play it now, this is van migrants. This is the shocking moment. A lorry full of migrants sparked motorway chaos as cops detained 14 people. We can see on the screen there, a lot of them are blurred out. Immigration enforcement picking up people who were in a van being brought into this country. It's not just small boats, it's various ways that the immigration enforcement people are attempting to lift these people, and the fact that they're checking, they're actually doing, you can see in that particular thing that's on the screen at the moment, handcuffing people, putting them into vans, showing Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, what they're up to. I mean, this is the kind of stuff they should be doing on a much wider spread basis, of course, but they are doing some of it, Tony.
Yeah, immigration enforcement definitely picked up their game recently. We've seen statistics issued by the government showing the increase in the number of raids in communities on illegal workers. This particular footage of a lorry shows that people are still getting in, I'm afraid, Peter, through lorries. They're not all coming on the boats, but we did a lot when I was there to stop lorry penetration. We've got Border Force teams over in France searching lorries. And of course, they can't claim asylum unless they can get here. So your strategy is to stop them coming. But yeah, the immigration enforcement teams are doing well in terms of the number of raids. But what you need to see, Peter, is detention and removals, don't you? Yeah. It's all very well arresting them, but if they're still here and the following day they get bail because there's nothing we can do about removing there, or because they're in the asylum system, then we're no better off. So I would like to see a much bigger investment in removals myself.
And we know, of course, that there are so many people going missing from asylum hotels and just into the ether as well. And speaking of asylum hotels, I just want to play this clip here of Samuel, who runs a hotel in Cambridge. This is what he has been saying.
They want me to house illegal immigrants in my 26-bedroom hotel here in Cambridge. I was offered by a company that offered to pay me £35,000 per month for almost 7 years. That's a lot of money. And they were going to use it to house illegal immigrants. And I said, no. Now, commercially, does it make sense? Well, I don't care if I make more money or less money. I want to run it as a hotel. On principle, that's what I decided. Sometimes you have to stick to your principles and put your values over money.
That's Samuel Leeds there, who runs a hotel in Cambridge. I've actually heard a very similar story to that from another owner of a small hotel who basically told me, look, the 7 years guaranteed from the Home Office, full of people who were asylum seekers or waiting for processing. And with that person was offered a couple of times by Serco, actually, just a contact of mine, who said that he and his wife could have retired, they could have had full occupancy, they could have done it for those 7 years and then retired. Very, very tempting offers, of course, for those hotels. He turned it down both times, but sometimes wonders whether it's the right thing. But what it absolutely shows, Tony, I think, is that the scale of this problem continues to such a huge degree, and it's not going to go away anytime soon, despite what the government's saying and all the different measures that they have announced over the past sort of 10 weeks or so.
It's not really. I mean, hats off to those hoteliers who are taking that line, but of course there's a huge amount of money involved in this.
Yeah.
Most of it government, most of it taxpayers' money, so you can see why others might take the deal.
If someone offered me £35,000 a month for almost 7 years, it's a very, very tempting offer, and I'm not sure I blame the hotel owners, to be brutally frank.
No, it's not right. So this is government policy, Peter. We know it's government policy. We talk about it all the time. But what we need to do is get back to detention. That's where migrants should go. If they come across the border illegally, they should be detained and kept in detention. Now, to be fair, this government have invested in Haslar and Campsfield House. I don't know if you saw that. These are detention centres that were in play in my day. They were closed down. They're opening them again. We do need a massive investment in our immigration detention estate, Peter, and they should stay in detention, and we should process them in detention and remove them from detention. Unfortunately, the asylum system, as we saw the NIO report this week, is broken because it takes too long. We can't detain people for various reasons, but we must get back to detain and deport. I'm hearing that from Reform. I'm now hearing that from the Conservatives. I'm not really hearing that from this government, but they are taking some steps, at least to move towards detention. But that holds the key. If we detain them, they won't be in the communities, they won't be causing mayhem, and let's get removals going, Peter. Detention and removals, that's what we were doing in the UK Border Agency. When I was there, I had removal targets. We did deliver, never removed everybody. We've never been perfect, but we're removing a dance like more failed asylum seekers than we are now, and we must get back to that. So my message would be, let's invest in detention and let's keep them detained, which we are empowered to do in law, and let's remove them very, very quickly from the country.
Tony, thanks for your thoughts there. Tony Smith there, the former head of UK Border Force. Lots of people getting in touch about another aspect to do with our borders, war, and whether Russia is planning one against us. That is certainly what we've been told to worry about and that the country needs to prepare for. Let's hear a voice note from Gaz on this. It's great when people send in voice notes. You do it through WhatsApp, 0344 499 1000. This is what Gaz says.
Going on about getting boots on the ground, isn't it the responsibility of all the European countries to stop Russia coming, if we have to put boots on the ground, to stop the Russian troops coming through their countries? We are an island. Do we not just retreat and sit back and defend our shores? Which really we can't blooming well do at the moment, with people coming over on dinghies. So what cat in hell's chance we stand to stop the bloody Russians?
Very good points there from Gaz. Similarly from Martin in Cheshire, who sent me a message to say, Starmer is mad to think that our own fighting age men would join up to leave our own people at the hands of illegal, undocumented men to run wild and destroy us from within. If I was young enough to join up, I wouldn't fight for this government. If they want British men and women to fight, first secure this country. How can we fight Russia when we can't even defend ourselves, says Martin. Barry says, Russia hasn't defeated Ukraine yet. NATO would be another formidable opponent. Putin seems to have the same misguided mentality as Hitler, that the enemy won't dare shoot back. I think that's a fair point, and I do wonder that given how little, it's horrible for the people of Ukraine. He's taken a fifth of Ukraine. It's dreadful. It's awful. He's a murderous dictator, Putin. I'm not denying that for a second. What I'm saying is that why do we have to be so worried about what he can achieve when in 3 years all he has achieved is a fifth of Ukraine, and there's been no serious attempt on Kyiv and no attempt that has worked. Of course, there have been great forces in the Ukrainian army fighting back, and they're very, very brave in doing so. But I just think we need a dose of reality here that perhaps many don't have. Lots to talk about, including the US government considering labelling UNRWA a foreign terrorist organisation. About time, if you ask me. That's the alleged aid agency in Gaza, which of course riddled by Hamas terrorists and the fact that they're teaching children to hate Jews and hate Israel as well. Should they be designated a foreign terrorist organisation? I think yes. Maybe you disagree with me. 0344 499 1000. We'll talk about that in a second. And also Primal Scream, the music group, reported to the police for screening anti-Semitic images of the Star of David merged with a swastika. This is in a music venue in North London. Stay with us.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Julia will indeed be back in this slot on Monday between 10 and 1. And just to say, I'll be here between 10 and 1 tomorrow and Sunday as usual. I'm doing Drive on Monday and Tuesday. I'll be with Julia for Prime Minister's Questions at 12 o'clock on Wednesday. I'm doing Breakfast on Thursday, and then I'm back in this slot between 10 and 1 Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That brings me right up to Christmas. I'll put it all on Twitter so you know when I'm on. And thank you to everybody who is so kind. And there have been quite a few people who've sent me cards and presents for Christmas, and I just want to say huge thanks to them. The latest from Angela Bob and their cat Rodney today. So very, very kind and very much appreciative of all of that. One person says, you don't fight for the government, you fight for king and country, and with people who care about it. We don't want people in the forces who don't want to be there, and especially people who break in and disrespect our values. My husband is involved in army recruitment. He agrees with me, says that person who wants to remain anonymous. Quite a lot on James Mathewson coming in, and certainly he said earlier on that he believes that every racist wants Nigel Farage to be Prime Minister. I don't think that's actually true, but nonetheless, Mark in Southampton has been in touch and says, wow, every racist wants Nigel Farage as their Prime Minister. It's disgusting. The left are responsible for some of the most vile abuse. Tory scum springs to mind. Mathewson is so blinkered, typical lefty muppet, says Mark in Southampton. Gary says, of course, James Mathewson does not like Nigel Farage. He dislikes everything Nigel and Reform stand for, because at the heart he is far left. I'm sorry to hear about him receiving death threats, which should never happen. Keith in Shrewsbury has, I'll read that out in just a second, but a final one on James Mathewson from Richard in the West Midlands. One of your previous guests referred to the people claiming Nigel Farage made racist remarks to them as victims. They're not victims until whoever they are accusing has been proven guilty. This is what the left do all the time. Once you call someone a victim, you're saying there is guilt. Nigel Farage should demand an apology, says Richard. And just on COVID, Keith in Shrewsbury says this suggestion that the COVID lockdown has caused the woke generation and mentally affected millions of young people is absolute madness. Let's not forget that this country was in turmoil for almost 5 years during World War II, and it created some of the greatest people the world has ever seen through adversity. Why does this stupid narrative keep being peddled? Keith, I'm afraid I disagree with you on that. I think there was a huge mental health fallout from World War II that wasn't understood at the time, simply because we just didn't have the same understanding of it. But yes, you're right, very, very brave people who saved our country. Lots to discuss in all of this, and we will get back to it in a second. But I just want to talk about Israel now and anti-Semitism in the UK as well. Perhaps we could start, actually. Jake Wallace-Simons is standing by on this. He is the author of Israelophobia, the newest version of The Oldest Hatred, and what to do about it. And Jake, I just want you to comment on what Primal Scream have allegedly been doing. This is a video that another indefatigable campaigner against anti-Semitism, Nicole Lambert, has brought to the public's attention. Let's just have a look at this video, and I will describe what's in it for those who are watching. So this is Primal Scream at an event at the Roundhouse, and you can see they're talking about genocide. They've got a Benjamin Netanyahu there, and in his eyes are, and Trump's eyes, and various other leaders, including Javier Milei and Ursula von der Leyen, a Star of David with a swastika inside it. Now, they've been reported to the police for this. Jake, perhaps you give me your reaction to this.
Well, I'm afraid it's classic anti-Semitism. There's no two ways about it. The conflict in Israel and in Gaza, of course, is a dreadful war, but it's a war. It's not a genocide. There are no concentration camps. There are no gas chambers. Nobody's been lined up against the wall and summarily executed by Israeli forces. The Israelis are not Nazis by any stretch. They don't have a racial hierarchy policy that they roll out across wherever they operate. There's no similarity between the Israeli army and the Nazis. And let's not forget Hamas, which of course is much closer to the Nazi side, influenced directly by the Nazis and taken on some of its fascist ideology, began this war. It wasn't something that Israel in any way asked for or started. And so making this comparison between Jews and Nazis is totally inaccurate, and that needs to be said loud and clear. But the motivation behind it is simply to demonize Jews, and demonizing Jews is the first step towards marginalizing them, expelling them, relegating them, denigrating them, and eventually destroying them. So I'm afraid that in comparing Jews to Nazis, Primal Scream are endorsing the same sorts of behaviour that the Nazis themselves engaged in, which was to cast the Jews as a source of all evil, and therefore the Jews needed to be dealt with.
Yes, and certainly we know that other pop stars have done this as well. Bob Vylan, for example, it's now many, many months now since that happened. Still no arrests and all of that. Even on Somerset Police, in fairness to them, were in touch with me this morning when I asked them about this, and they said inquiries are ongoing. One man attended a voluntary police interview, and we consider the use of a voluntary interview to be more appropriate than arrest. We will continue to issue any significant updates relating to this investigation to the public and to the media. We can, I think, safely assume that it was Pascal Robinson Foster who was interviewed as a result of that, but certainly there has been no further action on that just yet, and it's a question of how much actual appetite there is for the authorities to take action against these people, especially when we see they've taken action against other forms of racism.
That's right. I mean, the problem is, in a way, policing speech is not something which I'm particularly comfortable with in principle. And yet the thing is that what these people are doing is they're trying to provide themselves as test cases in order to sort of pressure the authorities to back down and then legitimise, for example, death to the IDF, for everybody to embrace and to say, and then to move the envelope further to try the next thing, maybe death to the Jews rather than the IDF, and then they'll say, well, we didn't mean all Jews, we only meant the genocidal ones, and then sort of provoking the authorities, do you dare stand against us on this one? And so it's a case of trying to normalise these really gruesome incitement slogans and sort of daring the authorities to take them down. It's using our principles of free speech against us so that we begin to give in to their basically authoritarian fascist tendencies.
And we've seen that the European Jewish Association has initiated illegal proceedings following the performance of Bob Vylan at a concert hall in Brussels on the 2nd of December, so 10 days ago, when chants of death to the IDF continued there. So clearly no form of actual deterrence has occurred after that interview with Avon and Somerset Police. I mean, it really is absolutely dreadful. I wonder if we could turn to the war in the Middle East, which seems to have died down to some degree, and unsurprisingly, the first casualty of war is truth. Now we are seeing so many bits of information coming out of there, including the fact, as we reported yesterday, that Hamas hid lots of baby formula to convince people that babies were starving. We had that ludicrous line from the UN relief chief who was saying that 14,000 babies were going to die in 48 hours. That was not true, and it was repeated by many, many journalists on the BBC and elsewhere. We also have information that the majority of journalists killed in Gaza were, guess what, linked to Hamas, which is what I had said, what you had said, Jake, time and time and time and time again. I mean, I personally believe that Israel should have allowed international journalists into Gaza, but nonetheless, we were told time and time again, these are journalists, these are independent people in Gaza. Guess what? They were in hock to Hamas, and many of them were terrorists themselves and members of Hamas.
Yes, it's been propaganda, as some of us pointed out, all the way through the war. And now that the war is pretty much over, at least for now, people are able to admit that it was propaganda latterly because there's no cost to it. Yeah. You know, the public attention's moved on. So, for example, the famine accusations, I don't know if it's come across anyone's attention, that there's been not a single picture of a starving child or civilian in Gaza, aside from those fake ones where people were suffering from congenital health defects. So, you know, Gaza is the most photographed conflict in the world, not a single picture of anybody starving, and yet we've been asked to believe that starvation's been taking place. But now that it's opening up, that accusation has been quietly dropped. And, you know, the whole thing has really been run on the basis of propaganda. Hamas has not been fighting a physical war primarily. It's been fighting a war of propaganda, a war for hearts and minds, to try to convince the world to support it, because it is much weaker than Israel. It cannot beat Israel on the battlefield, but it can isolate Israel diplomatically. It can turn the world against Israel and make Israel suffer in the longer term, bringing it down in that way over a period of generations. And it seems like, in a way, Israel has won the shooting war, but Hamas has won the propaganda war. And I think part of the problem is that people in the West don't really know what Gaza is like. I mean, to turn to the question of journalists in Gaza, under Hamas, it was like living in a Nazi dictatorship. There was no freedom, there was a secret police, there was retribution against anybody who spoke out against Hamas or who stepped out of line, including summary executions, tortures, imprisonment and retribution against your family. So any journalist who was free to operate inside Gaza did so under Hamas's regime, under Hamas's authority. And it's no surprise that many of them who were killed in the war happened also to be terrorists themselves. So the journalists in Gaza have not been impartial. You know, you mentioned that Israel should have allowed journalists in to this conflict, and I know where you're coming from, and part of me agrees with that. But if you look at previous conflicts when Israel did allow journalists in, they were given Hamas minders, only allowed to see things that were beneficial to Hamas, and pumped out more propaganda than they do already. So it's really a no-win situation from Israel's point of view, because it's dealing with an authoritarian Islamo-fascist regime over there.
Speaking of the international community, UNRWA has been an absolutely despicable organisation where it has taught Palestinian children to hate Jews and hate Israelis. It has also been part of the, I mean, there were Hamas terrorists who were part of UNRWA and the UN, this UN agency specifically for Gaza. Now there is the United States Department of State, which is Department of War as it's now called, holding advanced discussions on hitting UNRWA with terrorism-related sanctions. I think we can welcome that, Jake.
Absolutely. I mean, again, it comes down to people not knowing very much about Israel, Gaza and the UN. I mean, just a little bit of background. UNRWA is a refugee agency purely for the Palestinians. All other refugees in the world are looked after by the main UN refugee agency, the UNHRC. But the Palestinians they have their own agency, and it runs by different rules. So elsewhere in the world, refugees are helped to assimilate in the countries to which they've fled. Whereas in the Palestinian situation, they're kept in camps in order not to assimilate, to make them a political tool to destroy Israel in the long term. In most of the world, when you're a refugee, if you come to Britain, let's say, from Syria, and you have children, your children are then British. Whereas under the laws applying to the Palestinian refugees, you pass on your refugee status generation after generation. So, for example, Bella and Gigi Hadid are of Palestinian origin, great wealth, live in America, they're technically Palestinian refugees. The effect of that has been to magnify the number of refugees from 700,000 in 1947-48 to about 5 million today, because it's passed on generation to generation. So in that context, the UN is really working not to settle the refugee question, but to try to use them as a political instrument against Israel, and UNRWA is within that. UNRWA itself has employed many members of Hamas. Israeli intelligence says more than 1,000 at least are card-carrying members of Hamas or Islamic Jihad. At least 12 members of UNRWA took part in the October the 7th atrocities. And UNRWA has been hand in glove with Hamas in terms of stealing the aid and so forth, preventing it from getting to people to put pressure on Israel. And as you said, UNRWA schools teach unvarnished anti-Semitism towards young Palestinians growing up, and UNRWA facilities have been used to hold hostages in and have been used by Hamas as fighting centres. Often Hamas...
And it's actually the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, a National Security Advisor as well, who's called them a subsidiary of Hamas, which Hamas, of course, designated as a terrorist organisation by the US since 1997. So much in that. Jake, I could talk to you all day, but we've got to move on, but I really appreciate those. Jake Wallace-Simons there, author of Never Again, How the West Betrayed the Jews and Itself, as well as another book called Israelophobia, the newest version of the oldest hatred, and what to do about it. We're going to talk about the NHS in a second, and I just want to plant a seed in your mind. I was sent this actually by a listener earlier on today, who sent me this message that was put on by a very, very good Twitter account called Burnside. I don't think the person actually is called Burnside, because it's got a picture of the Bill character of Burnside, but there's some really good wisdom that's on it. A healthcare system that is supposed to support 60 million people at a cost of over 200 billion a year and employs 1.5 million is laid low by 2,500 hospitalisations for flu in winter, a season which seems to creep up on them every year like a total surprise. Let's get the latest on Roy Lilly's thoughts on that, the former NHS Trust chairman. We'll talk to him in just a second about all of this, including what the Health Secretary Wes Streeting has been saying. Stay with us here on Talk.
We need to have a conversation about class in this country and not about the colour of your skin.
It's the Harris playbook, right? They have Beyonce, we've got Lenny Henry.
Little Lily would rather have a lip smacker's lip gloss from aisle 3 of Target than a freaking whatever that ball roller was that Meghan was so proud of herself about.
We've become such a soft touch that our system is so easy to kind of work around and take advantage of.
Girl, you might be able to earn some money quickly, but no one's going to marry you.
Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Just on airport charges, thank you to Mark, who says the more absurd part of the airport drop-off is the fines. We were dropped at London Heathrow on a Sunday during the summer with a fee of £6. On the Wednesday, I remembered, went online, paid the fee, the site took my payment. A week after that, we got a fine of £40 arriving on the doormat. That is ludicrous, Mark. I want to talk now about the NHS, how it's coping with the flu. And Roy Lilly is with me, former NHS Trust Chairman. Good morning to you, Roy.
Morning, Peter.
I just want to put a sentiment that was sent to me by a viewer earlier on. I read this out just before the break, but I'll mention it again. A healthcare system that is supposed to support 60 million people at a cost of £200 billion a year, employing 1.5 million, laid low by 2,500 hospitalisations for flu in winter, a season that seems to creep up on them every year like a total surprise. What do you make of that, Roy?
Well, it's not right. I mean, it's well within the capacity of the NHS to manage 2,500 medical patients coming in with the flu. It is true that if you look across Europe, for example, if you take the number of beds per head of population per 1,000, most European countries centre around an average of about 5.5 beds per head of population. Here we're 2.5, so we have half the beds that some of the big comparable hospitals have in Europe. So we are unbedded, if I can invent a word to express it. But it's not true that the NHS is laid low. And I think, you know, Peter, there's a certain amount of politicking going on at the moment. I want to sort of phrase this carefully because I don't want to undermine the importance of people getting a vaccination and people, you know, trying to avoid getting ill and having the flu and all the rest of it. But what has happened here are two things. One, the flu has arrived earlier than it normally does. Now,
it's not much earlier, though, is it, Roy? It's only about a week or so.
No. It's about 3 weeks early. So what has happened is the peak that you get with the flu normally over the sort of December, January, and the fag end of February has started a bit earlier. So that's made everybody sort of wake up because it didn't really catch the NHS out, but it wasn't predicted to come early. It is also this H3N2 strand of the flu, which is a more virulent type of flu than was expected. It has sort of morphed into something a bit more nasty than we thought it was going to be. So it's a bit earlier. Right, and that's coincided with the second thing, and that is the junior doctors' strikes. Now, I think that the conclusions that Wes Streeting has been saying, that the NHS is going to collapse and it's pulled out the last Jenga brick and, you know, the NHS is going to fall about. I mean, I think that is more about piling pressure on the junior doctors and the reputation.
Is he going to get the result he wants on Monday morning, do you think, when the votes come through about what the junior doctors have actually decided?
Well, I wouldn't put money on it. And I tell you why. The junior doctors have been on strike now for a long time to sort out their pay. Now, there are other issues which needed to be sorted out, and Streeting's made some attempts to do that, which is fair to him. But at the end of the day, this is about salary. This is about money, how much they get paid. And this, in inverted commas, settlement doesn't include any element of a pay increase. Now, you can argue whether or not they should get a pay increase, but it doesn't include anything about a pay increase. So what Streeting is trying to do now is just to divorce the two elements of the pay claim. One is money, one is conditions. And he's tried to deal something about the conditions, but he's done nothing on pay.
Yeah.
My view is the hard line junior doctors, which are sort of the core of doctors that go on strike. Bear in mind that only about a third of junior doctors go on strike at any one time, and in the last strike, the figures came down to about 23%.
Yeah, and we see that support ebbing away to some degree.
Yeah, so I think my view is, I hope I'm going to be proved wrong, but my view is the hard line over the weekend will say, no, we've got Streeting against the wall. We should continue on with the strikes to see if we can get more, because Streeting keeps saying, I've got no money and I can't do any more. And he keeps doing a bit more. He's done a bit more on jobs. He's doing a bit more on allowances. He's done a bit more on paying for junior doctors' examination fees. And all this. So he keeps coming up with a bit more. And if I was a junior doctor, I might be thinking, well, strategically, you know what? We can keep pushing him.
Yeah, let's just string this out. Let's just string this out a little bit longer. I know exactly what you mean, Roy. Thank you. That's Roy Lilly there, former NHS Trust chairman, giving us his expertise this morning. What do you think about what he has said there? 0344 499 1000. Thank you to 18th Century Tory on Twitter. He says, credit where it's due. Mark and Peter this morning have been providing a more balanced approach to Ukraine in challenging the warmongers and allowing the public's sceptical view of the matter to be aired. Lots of people calling me a warmonger anyway, who seem to have perhaps missed the point of what I'm saying, but nonetheless, your views are welcome. 0344 499 1000. We'll take far more calls, texts, tweets and voice notes over the course of the next hour, right up to 1 o'clock, when Ian Collins will be here in the studio. Stay with us here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good Good afternoon, this is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell. Lots to discuss between now and 1 o'clock, including the NATO chief who says we need to prepare for war with Russia. Well, do we? Certainly Starmer is taking heed of that. One of his defence ministers says that we need to be more afraid of Russia. I'm not sure I agree with that. We'll talk as well about what's happening in Washington, because what they want, Trump anyway, wants to see 4 countries exit the EU as part of a dramatic new Make Europe Great Again plan. We'll take loads of calls this hour, as well as talking about all of that, and Britain must stop relying on the US for defence, says that defence minister. Also, Ed Miliband isolated as the EU prepares to reverse the petrol car ban. Lots to discuss. Many people want to get in on parking fines, as well as the war, or the war that may come, and James Mathewson as well seems to have been annoying a number of people. Lots to discuss. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call between now and 1 o'clock. You can text me at 7222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a WhatsApp voice message, less than a minute please, a WhatsApp text message, or give me a ring, all on the main number 0344 499 1000. So much to discuss between now and 1 o'clock. Stay with us here on Talk. Well, some sad news that has emerged in the last few minutes, and the deaths of 2 important cultural figures. One of them is Stanley Baxter, the Scottish actor and comedian. Absolutely hilarious, brilliant comic performer. He was one of the biggest stars on British television for several decades. He was born in Glasgow in 1926. He starred in a number of hit series between the 60s and the 80s, well known for his acting roles, and a pantomime regular as well. I remember learning about him. I wasn't really cognizant of him. I was born in 1984, but I remember seeing documentaries about him and some of the really, really hilarious roles that he had. There was one particular pastiche of the Towering Inferno I remember him doing, when there was he was playing a woman who lit her cigarette from the Towering Inferno and then did a sort of double take. As a result, he was a very, very, very funny comic actor, and he will be sorely missed. He's died at the age of 99, Stanley Baxter. Also news in the last few minutes that the best-selling author Joanna Trollope, she has died at the age of 82. She was known as the Queen of the Aga saga because her novels often focused on romance and intrigue in Middle England. Her daughters Louise, I should say, and Antonia said their beloved and inspirational mother had died peacefully in her Oxfordshire home yesterday. So that is both Joanna Trollope, the novelist, and Stanley Baxter, the comedian, both of whom have died. Right then, let's talk about the political news now with Henry Hill, who's the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home. Good afternoon, Henry.
Good afternoon.
Very interesting from Al Carnes, a war hero himself. He had the Military Cross, became a Labour politician, and now he says that we need to not rely on the United States for our own defence. Similarly, around the time that Mark Rutte, the NATO chief, says we should prepare for war with Russia. What do you think?
I mean, we should probably have taken this warning a long time ago. Donald Trump was president before. He's always taken the view that European countries are effectively free riding on American defense spending. And there is an element of that criticism which is not unfair. If you compare, I think America spends about 4% of GDP on defense. Very few European countries hit the NATO minimum of 2%. But it is now becoming much more acute. And we have seen, when it comes to Ukraine, European leaders have very strong views on Ukraine, constantly outraged at Donald Trump's handling of the Ukrainian situation. But again, despite having years and years of warning, have we stepped up to a point where we would be able to take up the slack if America did decide to pull the rug? No, we haven't. And so now effectively what we're seeing is European leaders being more or less frozen out of the negotiations on the future of Ukraine. So,
and it's interesting with Trump's thoughts on Europe and the EU more generally. Of course, he's always hated the EU. He's been very much against them for many, many years. Now he's saying that 4 separate nations he thinks should withdraw from it. This comes as, I know it's not an EU issue, it's a Council of Europe issue, a different body of countries. But when you have Keir Starmer with his battle in regard to the European Convention on Human Rights, it's interesting that all of this is happening at the same time. What's your analysis of that, Henry?
Essentially, this order that we have in Europe is just coming under huge pressure, because essentially we've set up a sort of in some ways an idealized system, and that has 2 elements, as you say. You have the European Union, which is essentially a project that aims for a post-national governance. And then you have the Council of Europe. Now, the Council of Europe is an interesting one because obviously when it was set up in 1948, the role of the Council of Europe was quite simple. It's like, let's not be Nazis. But as is the way of these things, it has mutated and expanded over time. And I was having this debate with somebody, not on television, but yesterday, when they were saying, oh, you know, the Council of Europe, the European Convention on Human Rights, the version that we signed in 1948, if it was still interpreted that way, nobody would be talking about leaving, because it was such a narrow de minimis treaty. You know, capital punishment was still compliant with the convention. Corporal punishment, that means like caning criminals, was still compliant with the convention. And over time, it's just got wider and wider and wider and wider. And again, it's an attempt at post-national, post-political governance, because it means that you've got 46 countries, all of them effectively with the same codified constitution that trumps their national laws. And that system might have seemed really workable during the sort of end of history era, when the last great opponent, the Soviet Union, was gone and everyone was just going to be evolving towards a sort of, we assumed, a fairly homogenous universal model of Western democracy. But actually, it turns out the 21st century is going to be full of some very, very difficult challenges, and different countries are naturally responding to those challenges in different ways, and they are in various ways asserting their right to do so as independent nations.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. And of course, Trump's view on all of this, and certainly his attempt to get peace in Ukraine, will come into all of that as well in terms of these international relations. I just wonder where you think the special relationship is for our own country between us and America, because in some ways we're very much aligned with America, in other ways we're far further apart than we have been for some time. And I just wonder where you sort of see that in the context of everything you've just been saying in the last 5 minutes or so, Henry.
I mean, I think we really need to stop talking about the special relationship. It was being satirized in Love Actually, which came out, what, 20 years ago?
Yeah.
It really, because America has a special relationship, and it's with Ireland, right? You know, it allows Ireland to basically prop up its economy by filching American corporation tax revenue. Now that's a special relationship if ever I saw one. But Britain and America don't really have one. I think the reason that it appeals so much to British politicians is because we are a country which has often quite a grand understanding of our role in the world, but also doesn't spend the money necessary to actually justify that.
Yeah.
So if you're a British politician, you want to go around, you know, strutting it on the world stage, but you recognise that we don't spend nearly enough on defence to do that on your own terms. The special relationship allows you to try and write checks that you expect the Americans to cash. We need a more independent defence posture. That's simply a fact. That's not to say there's more than one way that could go. You could have an independent British military sort of doctrine which was still focused on the Royal Navy and about protecting our trade, or you could have a more Europe-aligned one, which was actually a very big historic shift for us, more focused on having a deployable land military with the eye of maybe deploying it in Eastern Europe against Russia. But of course, for people who are worried about, you know, Donald Trump's shift to the right and whether or not America is still going to be a reliable ally for Britain, the only alternative for a big multilateral alliance is a European alliance. The main military partner in that alliance would be France, you know, biggest military power in Europe, nuclear power. But in France, the Front National, or the Rassemblement National, comes second in every presidential election, and at some point they're going to win one.
Yeah.
I think that the idea sometimes when people just focus on Donald Trump, they posit Europe as if it's automatically some kind of more congenial alternative.
It's a very good point.
Sorry. And sometimes that, and as I was just saying, we posit Europe as automatically a more congenial alternative to America, but that probably isn't true. If you fast forward 10 years' time, some of these European countries, we've already had Geert Wilders and the PVV. They won an election in the Netherlands. Some of these countries will have Trumpish governments within the next 10 years.
And we look at the 30-year-old leading Front National, who sees a lot of parallels with Nigel Farage, for example. He wants to be the next leader or the next president of France. That may well happen as well. Just before you go, Henry, I just wondered if I could ask you your reaction to the number of people claiming universal credit for health reasons rocketing by 1 million in just 1 year. Can Labour get any grip on these numbers. Certainly, I don't want people who genuinely have disabilities or generally have health concerns to be denied benefits, certainly, but there do seem to be quite a number of people who are claiming these benefits who weren't previously.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you look at the numbers, one of two things is happening. One, there is some absolute epidemic currently being unleashed that we're not really talking about, which doesn't appear to have any symptoms or a name or to have worried the doctors particularly, but is nonetheless crippling hundreds of thousands of people who can't work. Or something has gone wrong with the criteria for claiming the universal credit and the medical side of universal credit. A lot of this, the Tories do have to take some responsibility for. It was the Conservatives who passed a change which meant that mental health would be considered given equal standing with physical health, which means that suddenly people could, that's why things like anxiety and depression can now get you a Motability car when they couldn't previously. But I think that even if you're Labour, and you want because if you're Labour, you want to maintain the credibility of the system. You believe in the welfare state, and that actually does require you to crack down on absurd abuses.
Yes,
right?
yes, it does. Yes, it does. So the system has integrity within it. That's another excellent point. Henry, thank you. Henry Hill, there, Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, giving us his analysis of the big political stories of the day. Lots of people in touch on what the Defence Minister Al Cairns has been saying on war and Mark Rutte as well. Let's hear a voice note from Kevin.
Regarding so-called war with Russia, I don't believe it for 1 minute. I don't believe we're any closer to war than we were 20 years ago. But that's just my personal opinion. But I will say one thing. As far as politicians are concerned, there's no such thing as a bad war. Remember Margaret Thatcher? She was under massive pressure, and then she suddenly sent task force to Falklands, and that turned her fortunes around. I actually think under this terrible, pathetic Prime Minister we've got, it'll work in the opposite direction, because let's face it, who's willing to fight for this country? Even our own government don't seem to want to stick up for this country. So I find it laughable.
It's a very fair point. I agree with a lot of that. Another person on Twitter says, all these idiots saying we're close to war with Russia and blaming Russia for the war are talking out of their backsides. They're warmongering. Anyone who listens to them is an idiot. It's them that want a war, not Putin. I would trust Putin over Starmer and Europe. I disagree with that, I'm afraid. I would absolutely never trust Putin. I think he is a horrible, evil, murderous dictator, but I do think we need to keep our critical faculties when it comes to Ukraine. Zelensky ain't Jesus. I've been saying that for 3 years. Peter Cardwell's show may as well be called Peter Cardwell's Warmonger Show, says Henry. I can't listen to it. I may as well listen to the BBC. It's the same biased nonsense. If you've been listening to the last 2 hours and 15 minutes and think that I am a warmonger and I am trying to get a war started between us and Russia, I suggest that you're listening to a very, very different programme, because that is not my opinion and certainly not what I'm trying to encourage. Christopher says, I don't think it would be Russia alone. North Korea are already fighting on Ukrainian soil with Russia. It looks like we would also be going to war with North Korea. Good point from Christopher. Welsh Rob, very nice one from him, says, you opened up about yourself quite a bit in your show this morning, mate. Just want to say you're not alone when you talked about your sickness record at school because you hated it, and also your issue with anxiety. I thought you were talking about me. Keep well. Well, Rob, thank you very, very much indeed, and I really appreciate that. And yeah, look, I would say my third year in school when I was 13, 14 was probably the worst year of my life. It was grim, I was bullied, and horrible things happened. But I think, it gets better, and I have a great life now. I'm really, really privileged to do this job. I love doing this job. I love talking to you, and I love it when you pick up the phone and give me a ring at 0344 499 1000, as Tim has done in London. Tim, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hi, Peter. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I was in the Royal Air Force in the 80s. And I'd just like to point out that politicians seem to have missed the point about learning from history. The interwar period was such where we ran our military down to almost nothing. And since the Cold War ended, the Berlin Wall came down, and successive governments have used the military budget as the low-hanging fruit to plunder. Now, I'm not a warmonger, but the point I would make is that we have taken our military down to such a small point now that we don't have the infrastructure to be able to recruit back into it.
Yep.
So very well saying we want to recruit lots of troops again. But if you look at all the army barracks or the RAF stations that became RAF barracks have now all closed, where are you going to put these people if you want to?
It's a very good point. It's a very good point.
Miss the interwar history point.
It's a very, very good point, Tim, and thank you for making it. I appreciate that. That's Tim in London there, and thank you for your service to our country as well in the Royal Air Force. Really appreciate that. We're going to take more of your calls, text, tweets and voice notes next here on Talk. If you want to pick up the phone right now and get your voice on the air between now and 1 o'clock, even perhaps in the next few minutes, 0344 499 1000.
We need to have a conversation about class in this country and not about the colour of your skin.
It's the Harris playbook, right? They have Beyonce, we've got Lenny Henry.
Little Lily would rather have a lip smacker's lip gloss from aisle 3 of Target than a freaking whatever that ball roller was that Meghan was so proud of herself about.
We've become such a soft touch that our system is so easy to kind of work around and take advantage of.
Girl, you might be able to earn some money quickly, but no one's going to marry you.
Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to everybody who has been in touch, including one person who says, how can anyone suggest Macron is a friend of the UK? Rosie on Twitter as well says, if war is on the horizon, can I suggest we need farmers more than ever now? Think how they fed the country during the last world wars. Perhaps Starmer and Reid should rethink their farm inheritance tax. I think you're absolutely right, Rosie. They should rethink it for lots of reasons, but that's a very, very good one as well. Thank you to this texter who says, why would we be afraid of Russia? Putin has been bogged down in Ukraine for nearly 4 years, making little progress. If he went up against NATO, he knows he'd lose. The country we should really be afraid of is China, who would wipe the West out in a few weeks. Why are the politicians focusing so much on Russia and not China? Could it be because they know the China battle is already lost, or do they just want to distract us from the dire economic picture in Europe and appear to be being strong leaders? The Ukraine war needs a negotiated end, Donbass ceded to Russia as it almost was after World War II. There's a lot in that I think is very, very wise. Not sure I agree with all of it, but it's very, very interesting, and thank you for it. Another person says, we better get out the bows and arrows and catapults and start enlisting our pensioners ASAP because we don't have the troops or the munitions to defend ourselves against the joint might of Russia, China and North Korea, not to mention the mad mullahs. World War III in Europe is coming as soon as the enemies realise we are losing the support of the US. Our weak political leaders have led us to this scary situation with their utter incompetence and woke policies. How many sleeper cells have we got here amongst the illegal immigrants who are ready to attack us from within? God help us. So a range of views on all of this. Let's hear what Kate in Oxfordshire has to say. She's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Kate, you're very, very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Morning.
Hello there.
Well, I think that, you know, whether we're going to be going to war imminently or not, whether it's tomorrow, next week, next month, I actually think, you know, we should have been preparing for this years ago. You know, we're not prepared to go to war maybe even in a year or 2 years. And I think a lot of that is because the defence budget has been slashed. Great, we're spending it on lots of other things. But the problem I think that is faced with the situation of war being imminent is that, a little bit of a backstory, my husband owns a manufacturing company, and that's digital and additive manufacturing. And he has had so many meetings with very top people in the defence sector, whether it's land, air or sea. And one of the things that they face, and the conversations he's been having for years, is that it's not just budgetary, it's the red tape and the bureaucracy they've got to go through to get anything done. So it's not, you know, we're not ready by any stretch. And one little bit of sort of information he gave me with which tells you how depleted our stocks are, is that Ukraine, for example, have destroyed 31,000 Russian machines of one type in a very short period of time, and the UK actually has a stock of less than 10.
Yeah, very,
so
very interesting. Yeah.
we have no supplies, we've got no people, and why on earth would anybody want to go to war where they've got nothing to actually use to defend our country? And I think, you know, looking at what we've been talking about today, Britain must not rely on the US for defence, says Minister. Well, actually, I think really the only defence we've got is to pool our resources, because we've got none. And the US, love us or not at the moment, we need them.
I don't think they're going to pull out their support, though, are they? I mean, there's certainly strain on that relationship, but they're still an ally, Kate, I think.
Absolutely. I don't think any relationship, I mean, I know that it's not great at the moment, but people can fall out, they can make up, and in times of such situations where we need people's help, you know, people prevail. It's not just a Keir or a Trump war, whether they like each other or not. It's actually about who needs who. And the US have needed us so much over the years, and it's not payback. They're not just looking after us because we are, you know, the small underdog in all of this. We all need to look after each other, and we do need to look for the US to help us. But we need to look for our own. We literally need to get all of our manufacturing companies ready to go. You know, with additive and digital, you know, you can have a computer file. It's literally plugged into something. You know, I'm simplifying it here, but you can work so quickly to get things printed and machine printed that have very little parts as well. That's one of the beauties of the things with digital manufacturing.
Kate, thank you very much for that. Really, really interesting call. Please ring me anytime. That's Kate in Oxfordshire there. Texter says, hi Peter, I always enjoy your shows. I voted to stay in the EU despite the frustrations of its bureaucracy. After all, look at the constipation of our own civil service. But it's extraordinary that war raging on Poland's border and some EU countries gearing up for war. Brussels is quibbling about what it call veggie sausages, listening to the head of some EU council on Times Radio yesterday about ECHR reform to stop the scale of migration fills me with despair. Maybe war is needed to stop our decadence. Stuart says, please let Jake Wallace-Simons know that the woke lefties have not won the war, because normal people who have a brain know that Hamas, while capable of murdering women and children, are also capable of massive propaganda and lying through their teeth, says Stuart. On the war question as well, Brian in Cheshire has been in touch. 0344 499 1000 is the number he's called. Brian, what would you like to say?
Oh, well, good afternoon, Peter.
Hi there.
My concern, and I don't really hear anybody saying about this, is if our armed forces are depleted so much, if we had to go and fight some sort of war, and I'm sure Europe are the same, there's so many migrants now in our country and across Europe, they're not going to fight for us, or I wouldn't think so. So our forces are gone. Who's protecting us in our country?
It's a very fair point, and I think it's one that a lot of people will agree with, especially as we've given so much aid to other countries, whether that's financial aid, whether that's military aid, and many people will think, as I do, that defence of our own realm is the most important thing. Some will argue that Ukraine and giving military aid to them is something we should be doing because it helps our own country. I'm not so sure. What do you think yourself, Brian?
Well, it's, I think, like the Romans always had, I don't know whether they're called the Praetorian Guard, who never left Rome, so that they were always protected. Well, if our armed forces stay to protect us here, then we haven't got enough to go anywhere else.
Listen, thanks for your thoughts. Really appreciate that, Brian. That's Brian in Cheshire there. Let's take another call from Barry in North Yorkshire about these parking fines and fees, I think is what you've given me a ring about. Barry, tell me your thoughts.
Yes, you were talking about airports earlier today.
Yeah.
And I've had a similar experience at railway stations, the one in Leeds in particular. They've changed the one-way system, and it's virtually impossible to get to Leeds Central Station without going through a tortuous one-way system.
Mm-hmm.
And about a month ago, I was dropping a couple of relatives off at the station on a Sunday afternoon. You'd think it would be quite quiet. It took us half an hour to travel about half a mile.
Oh, so frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah, and to have the tickets for a certain train time, you know, that people visit. So I said, look, you need to get out here. We were near the drop-off point at the station, and they got out the car and off they went. And a week later, I got a fine from a parking company saying I'd stopped in a no-stopping zone. I'd pulled into a side road. It was double yellow lines, but there was a gate, not a gate, a barrier, like a temporary barrier there.
Yeah, yeah.
And they got out. I didn't stop the car, obviously, and didn't stop the engine.
Yes.
They got out, and that was the last I thought of it. Now,
how much was the fine?
It was £100, but they'd graciously let me pay 60 if I did it within 4.
Oh, that's very kind of them. My goodness, I'm sure you feel very grateful to them. I mean, what an absolute farce. There's so little common sense that comes into all of this, and so many of these businesses simply say, right, there are people doing a totally normal thing, dropping someone off at the train, dropping someone off at the airport. We see them coming, and despite the fact that that's part of the experience, that's part of what is going to happen at all times when these systems happen, we're going to slap another charge on them. It's ludicrous, Barry, and then a fine for you.
Yeah, I'd like to know who owns the road where I was illegally parked. You know, and you know, it's just like a normal road. You could have driven in, and there was cars I could see parked on the same road about 100 yards further up.
Yes.
And the drop-off spot was nearby, which was gridlocked. And you know, I don't know if the council are involved in this scam, because it's just like a normal road in the middle of Leeds.
Well, I just think a lot of people will identify with your experience. They may not have had exactly the same thing happen to them, but there's so many people who just think, hold on a second, we're just going about our daily business, basically. And so many people get fined for such minor things. Listen, thanks for bringing that to us, Barry. That's Barry in North Yorkshire. I want to take another call before the break from Paul in Kent, who's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Paul, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hello, Peter. Thanks for taking my call.
Good to talk to you.
Just been watching your brilliant show and tuned in and saw the bits about the threats from Russia.
Yeah.
Whilst not wishing to diminish the threats that the Russians might pose, I'm not really, that well informed about that. I obviously read about it, but I just wanted to say that the British people are under far more threat from the boat people and radical Islam than ever they are from the Russians.
And I think a lot of people will feel that. It feels like a much more real threat, because every time that we open our newspaper or switch on our radio or television, we're hearing things such as the headline today about those two rapists, those two 17-year-old rapists of the 15-year-old girl who were bailed. They were bailed by a judge and then sentenced rightly to about 10 years in prison each. I don't know if they're actually going to serve that or whether they'll be deported. And there are many people who feel the danger is on our doorstep. It doesn't come from thousands of miles away in Moscow.
Yes, I totally agree. And I just think that it's partly classic distraction tactics. The government is failing so badly in every other every way you can think of. I was a member of the Labour Party for years, and I knew they were going to be knew is perhaps the wrong way. I predicted that they were going to be an absolute disaster when elected to office. I mean,
when did you leave, Paul?
I left in 1999 overnight. I wrote to the Labour Party in Walworth Road. It was about the introduction of tuition fees because I had a student grant to be a mature student. I benefited greatly from that.
Yeah.
Earned a lot more money and paid more tax than ever I would have done if I'd stayed what I was doing before. I wrote to the Labour Party and said, I'm resigning my membership because I do not agree with tuition fees. They didn't even bother to acknowledge it. The letter was sent to their HQ at Walworth Road. 18 months later, I got a letter from the Labour Party telling me that my membership had lapsed. That was
right. Well, there we are.
Now, I mean, that government, whatever people think of Tony Blair, he was a statesman. He had a vision. Gordon Brown, Robin Cook, Mo Molan, David Blunkett.
Do you know what? I was on the radio last night on a different station on Times Radio talking to John Hutton. Do you remember the Minister John Hutton? And
I do.
I certainly didn't agree with everything he said, but the intellect of that guy and the ability of someone like John Hutton now in the House of Lords made me kind of realise we did once, even if you disagreed with them, and I disagree with a heck of a lot of what Tony Blair did. Nonetheless, there were serious people. There were serious people who had a mission and had a very clear idea of what they wanted the country to be. If you sort of pin down, Keir Starmer, shone a light in his eyes and said, what do you want this country to be? Beyond bland platitudes, I'm not sure we get a clear answer, Paul.
No, and I just feel there's a sort of move to basically insult the British people. I mean, calling people far right because they're concerned about little girls getting murdered and women being raped it's just utterly, it's unfathomable.
Yeah.
And I can't tell people how disgusted I am by their use of that sort of language.
Yeah.
And all they seem interested in doing is smearing Reform, Nigel Farage, smearing the Tories, etc. Instead of actually, as you say, having a vision, what they want the country
and engaging with the truth, Paul.
Yes.
Of what we know, this is in front of our faces, certainly. Paul, listen, thank you for your thoughts today. I really appreciate them. That's Paul in Kent there. If you've got anything to add to what Paul says, you want to talk about whatever you want to talk about between now and 1 o'clock. We have a couple of other guests, but I'll take some calls too between now and 1. And certainly on my shows tomorrow and Sunday, where there's even more of a chance to have a chat as well. 0344 499 1000. I'm on the air tomorrow and Sunday between 10 and 1, and for the next 26 minutes here on Talk as well, and until Ian Collins comes up. We'll have a chat with him about what's coming up on his programme as well. Stay with us, because we're going to talk in just a second about Washington. We're going to speak to Matthew Bryza, former White House official, about all sorts of issues, particularly these defence and security issues as well. Stay with us.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Elisa in Chelmsford, who says, regarding defence, does the British government really take the defence of our country seriously? I think not. The UK chose not to send the army to a multi-day seminar in Tel Aviv where good security practice was shared. The US, France, Germany and Canada had the common sense, among other countries, to turn to Israel for advice. Nat, who is in Tel Aviv herself actually, says, should UNRWA be labelled as foreign terrorist organisation? Hell yeah. Also, warmonger, you, Cardi P, the sanest voice out there on the subject. A special thank you for holding Zelensky to account, which so many do not. Yeah, I've said it before and I'll say it again, Zelensky is not Jesus. There is an awful lot of corruption in Ukraine and it's not just good against evil. Is Putin evil? Yes, he is. Is Zelensky all good? No, he is not. Let's go to America now to speak to Matthew Bryza, who is a former White House official in the Obama administration. Matthew, great to talk to you. We have quite a number of stories today. Al Carnes, one of the defence ministers here in the UK, talking about Britain dependent on US security guarantees for the last 60 years and we cannot rely on them any longer. There are clearly fissures, and have been for some time, between the United States and the UK. Where do you see this going necessarily, and is our defence minister right to say that, do you think, Matthew?
Yeah, Peter, I do think he's right. And as you and I, you won't remember, probably way back in February on the margins of the Munich Security Conference, we had a conversation about the shocking first sign of such a fissure between the United States and its European allies. At that time, you'll recall, Vice President J.D. Vance gave a speech in which he was highly condemned European countries, especially Germany, for not allowing far-right speech. And now President Trump has really amped up that approach. And in the latest national security strategy, it is written that he believes Europe faces, what do they call it, civilizational erasure because of political correctness and wokeness and over-regulation. And that the United States wants Europe to be strong, wants it to be great, but Europe needs to take care of its own security. And the United States wants a stable relationship with Russia. So that is a massive shift in American foreign policy since the late 1940s. And I think under Trump, that fissure will continue.
And the national security strategy that has come out, certainly has been leaked anyway, this kind of idea of making Europe great again under Donald Trump. A lot of countries, including our own, quite worried about this in many parts of the establishment, thinking about Donald Trump overreach perhaps, and apparently urging the United States to encourage Austria, Italy, Hungary and Poland to move closer to the American orbit by quitting the EU. Do you think that's likely?
I think it's impossible. I began my diplomatic career in Poland, and I'm a Polish American. And getting into European institutions was a dream beyond imagination for Poles during the communist period. And once they got in, they're never going to go out. Okay, the Poles, they're annoyed by the way the European Union has reacted to, from the EU's perspective, Poland's violation of certain principles on democracy and the choice of judges. But no, I don't think it's likely at all. But it's not surprising that Trump said that. I mean, from one perspective, it's crazy that any American leader would try to sort of encourage the dismantlement of the EU. But on the other hand, President Trump has long said that not only that he dislikes the EU, but he said its entire reason for being was to, as he put it, screw the United States. So, he doesn't like multilateral
So weakening it in any way is within his interest. But he think that's in the interest of these countries as well. I mean, is that specifically because of views to do with those countries, or just that he perhaps thinks they're the most likely to listen to him when it comes to EU withdrawal?
I think he thinks they're the most likely to listen because Poland has had this dispute with the European Union for the last several years over independence of judges. Austria is kind of always in the middle, and it's hard to predict whether or not they even are clear on whether their strategic orientation is more east or west. Italy has a far-right government under Giorgia Meloni, so I think he thinks those are possibilities. And Hungary, of course, I mean, the EU is sort of at political war with Viktor Orban, and Trump and Orban really get along. Hungary being the closest country in Europe to Russia. So I think Trump was he's looking for low-hanging fruit, but I don't think those countries are gonna leave, though they have, as the UK proved. they have the right to leave if they so decide.
Absolutely correct. I don't always support what the Trump administration does, but I think I can almost 100% support this idea. This is reporting by Reuters, the news agency, saying that officials within the Trump administration have held advanced discussions on hitting the US Palestinian Refugee Agency, UNRWA, with terrorism-related sanctions. That's apparently the State Department warning of that. Given what UNRWA has been involved with, the fact that Hamas has infiltrated it to such a huge degree, the fact that Hamas terrorists were part of UNRWA, and the fact that it teaches in its UNRWA schools children in Palestine, in the Palestinian territories, certainly in Gaza anyway, were taught to hate Jews and hate Israel, I think that's something I can probably support. I just wonder how likely you think that is and what you make of those reports.
Well, I mean, there's long before October 7th, there was great concern in Israel about UNRWA being used to advance terrorist causes. So put it that way. I remember 15 years ago reading about that. I don't think you would never get a Security Council resolution that would designate UNRWA a terrorist organization because it's a UN organization, and there will always be those who oppose that. But still, it's a powerful signal that having members of Hamas be operatives in the organization, that is utterly unacceptable.
Yeah. Listen, thank you very much, Matthew. Always good to talk to you. Matthew Bryce, there, former White House official in the Obama administration. Gavin sent me a voice note on the prospect of war. This is what Gavin says.
If you look at our Prime Minister and you look at the way he talks and you look at the way he behaves, he is not a war-ready Prime Minister. He's not a knowledgeable man on war. He doesn't have a background in military. He doesn't understand military. If we go to war while he is in power, it will not be good. That man does not know war. He doesn't understand it. He doesn't understand how to behave. He belongs in a courtroom, in a quiet little corner, throwing his weight around in a courtroom with words. Otherwise, he's just empty promises.
Gavin, thank you. Let's find out what Andrew thinks. He's given me a ring from Hertfordshire on 0344 499 1000. Andrew, good afternoon. What would you like to say?
Good afternoon. That Gavin's got it spot on. This coalition of the willing is doing really well, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I just wonder what the point of it is. Certainly, Zelensky was here on Monday, and apart from shoring up these allies and having a grip and grin and being ignored by Larry the Cat, I'm not sure what it was for.
Yeah, I agree. The thing is that you said earlier that, Russia, the Litvinenko poisoning only affected a few people. What that is from Putin is it shows wherever you are in the world, if you're an enemy of his, he can get to you.
Yeah, correct.
And the reality of it is that Putin, it's Vladimir the Great who was brought into Christianity in Kiev. And that is where the epicenter of old Russia. Putin is never going to stop until he gets the whole of Ukraine.
And that may well be the case, Andrew, but he hasn't done very well so far, has he?
No, he hasn't. But remember, not putting you forward or me forward, with great values, but we have better values. He doesn't care because the individual doesn't matter, the state does.
Yeah.
So he'll just throw people at it. It doesn't matter that they're dying. The bit that's interesting is that what Trump's going to do with UNRWA is really good. But what is it? Is it that Putin holds the markers on some loans to Trump's business, which we've never seen the detail of, because Trump could end this. Just give the Ukrainians the long-range missiles, and it ends.
Yeah. Listen, I think a lot of that makes a lot of sense. Andrew, thank you very much for your call there. That's Andrew in Hertfordshire. If you want to get your voice on the air between now and 1 o'clock, 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. We're going to talk in just a second about Ed Miliband. He's apparently isolated as the EU prepares to reverse the petrol car ban. Stay with us here on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to the tweeter who says Putin is obviously a vile warmonger, but it's not him blocking elections in Europe, arresting political opponents, jailing people for speech, axing juries, ignoring Labour's manifesto, and flooding the continent with rapists and murderers. That is an interesting one from you. Thank you. Another person says, talk of Starmer and this Labour government taking us to war with Russia. Are you kidding me? They can't even get the bins emptied in Birmingham or stop thousands of illegal migrants entering the country. As well as that, Fern in Glasgow says the coalition of the willing is the European army that Nick Clegg and David Cameron said would never happen. They've done it by stealth and nobody is talking about it. Did Zelensky leave with big suitcases of cash? Question mark, says Fern in Glasgow. Cliff in Berkshire, regarding road traffic fines, when you use the criminal justice system as an extension of the taxation system, you bring both systems into disrepute, says Cliff, with absolutely the usual common sense that Cliff has when he texts in. Always good to hear from him. Craig in Edinburgh says, why would people send their children to fight in a war when we have hundreds of thousands of fighting-age migrants that apparently fled war sitting here safe? Also, how much more perilous would it be if Labour had succeeded in getting rid of our nuclear deterrent? Tim is here, says what is being spread around regarding Putin sounds very similar to when I served in the 1980s and 90s. However, what the worry is of recruitment versus discharge remains the same or gets worse. We won't have an army in the last 5 to 8 years. And Ronald Wood in Newcastle upon Tyne says the election of Zelensky and his major backer, who now resides in Israel, Igor Kolomsky, is barely mentioned, a man who had his own private army in Ukraine. Ronald, thank you for that. Ronald Wood in Newcastle upon Tyne, presumably not a member of the Rolling Stones. Let's speak to Harry Wilkinson now, who is head of policy at the Global Warming Policy Foundation. This is about the story that Ed Miliband, the Net Zero Secretary, isolated as the EU prepares to abandon a petrol car ban. The ban would have required a 100% fall in passenger vehicle carbon emissions by 2035. That would effectively ban new petrol and diesel cars from sales, including hybrids. But now we have Manfred Weber, who is head of the European Parliament's biggest group of MEPs, saying that the requirement would now be reduced to 90% and that a total ban had been taken off the table. Bit of a slap on the face for those who say net zero is everything, like Ed Miliband. Harry?
Well, exactly. And on the face of it, this is, a modest change to the policy, but I think its wider significance is very clear because, for a long time we've seen this absolutist policy heading towards a ban completely on petrol and diesel vehicles by 2035, and that has been absolutely devastating for the car industry in Europe. It's had the arrogance to think it could just change from producing conventional vehicles to electric vehicles and continue its high sales. But of course, when it comes to top-down government targets, it's very difficult to plan the economy that way, and the companies haven't been able to deliver. They haven't been able to sell nearly as many EVs as they were hoping. The German car industry in particular has been collapsing. If we think the economy is struggling here in the UK, which it is, we should look at Germany, which is facing an even more devastating crisis as its manufacturing sectors go into decline. The car industry is a big part of that.
It must be very difficult for the car. It must be very difficult for the car industry, Harry, because if the goalposts keep shifting here, and you've got to plan these things well in advance when it comes to materials, manufacturing, workforce, all that kind of stuff. And if they're being told right now it's 2035, now it's 2030, we've had this review as well, the government a review penciled in for 2027. The Shadow Energy Secretary, Claire Coutinho, saying rather than banning, taxing and forcing people into electric cars, the government should get out of the way and back consumer choice. That's why we have to repeal the net zero legislation, cut people's electricity bills by 20% with the cheap power plan the Tories have, she says, and allow people to use that cheap electricity to buy the products they want to when they want to. There's quite a lot in that.
She's absolutely right. I mean, the bigger picture here is that the UK is becoming increasingly isolated. There is now a growing global movement to push back some of these net zero targets, which have been doing so much harm. But Ed Miliband is sticking out with his, ultra aggressive net zero agenda. He isn't incorporating that pragmatism that we're now seeing in the EU, that we're seeing in many other parts of the world. And so Britain is now alone facing these really draconian net zero targets. And all the time, our industries are really in decline. We're losing many, many jobs. We've been promised all these green jobs, but the reality is that across our manufacturing sectors, we are losing many, many more jobs than we are gaining in the green sectors.
Harry, thank you. That's Harry Wilkinson, who's head of policy at the Global Warming Policy Foundation. A government spokesman said, we remain committed to phasing out all new non-zero emission cars and van sales by 2035. Let's take a call from Peter in Dorset, final caller of my show today. Peter, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Good afternoon. Unfortunately, the blood-curdling situation, and I completely disagree with your previous caller, is not the fact that we've got migrants and affecting the situation just internally, and we're being disemboweled from inside. We have the threat from the outside, and that's the blood-curdling thing. We have from inside and outside, and people need to wake up. And
so what should we do militarily? Should we stop relying on the US and get a lot more munitions and soldiers ready to go, do you think?
We should definitely be expanding our armed forces, as should the rest of Europe. And unfortunately, we should be going back to a solidification of what was, but in now, a situation that was like the Berlin Wall, because at that time we had security. However horrible and a terrible situation that was, you know, my father was in national service in 1948 on the Austrian border with the Iron Curtain. Unfortunately, we don't want that again, but I'm afraid this is what we are faced with.
You think it's as bad as them? You think it's as bad as 1948, Peter?
Sorry?
You think it's as bad as 1948, Peter? You think it's as bad as that?
Yes, it's worse, and I'll tell you why it's worse. Because we've got Russia, who are on our doorsteps, backed by the Chinese. And so we have infiltrations already going on around the UK, whether it's under the water or in the air, and people need to wake up before it is too late.
Okay. Peter, listen, thanks for your call. I really appreciate that. Lots more to discuss in regard to Starmer and Zelensky. John in Leeds has been in touch with a message to say, hi Peter, Russia will not invade the UK as Starmer is in bed with China. Being an agent for China, I don't think Keir Starmer's an agent for China. Just see all his and his party's visits to the area, and Russia's an ally to China. So in a roundabout way, we're an ally of Russia, says John in Leeds. I'm afraid I don't agree with that, John, but listen, thank you for that message. Anyway, thanks to everybody who has been in touch, and if you didn't get your call or your message read out on this show, I'm sure Ian Collins would love to hear from you. He's here on the other side of the news. You can get in touch with him. Ian, great to see you. What's coming up in your programme?
In fact, this is just broken. An email came in from Amazon. My inflatable Santa has been dispatched.
Has it now? Excellent. Yeah. Excellent.
Well, I had deflation issues with the last one, as you may remember.
More a case of blow, blow, blow than ho, 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 perhaps?
Well, you might say that. I couldn't possibly comment. But when you wake up and realise that your Father Christmas has deflated in your own garden, then you know there's a problem. So
it's very disappointing.
But the new one is on the way, so we'll be keeping track on that throughout the course of the afternoon.
Excellent. Yeah, very good.
We'll be various reporters around the country tracing the journey.
Certainly, and of course you'll probably get a phone call in the middle of your show from the delivery man saying, I'm at your front door.
Yeah, and I can go, no, but you're not outside my front door.
Yeah, exactly.
I've had a couple of those. The takeaway man that insisted he was outside he said, I'm outside your front door now. I went, you're not, because I'm outside my front door. There's no one outside here.
You're not here.
And he insisted. He said, no, I'm outside your front door. Yeah, you're outside someone's front door.
Someone's front door, just not mine.
But it just wasn't mine. Turns out he was in a completely different part of town.
Well, there we are.
Wrong road and everything.
Did you eventually get said pizza?
It eventually arrived. It was a little too cold and too crusty, despite ordering crusty. But that goes with the territory, doesn't it? We're talking about flu, of course, among other things, because it's back. I mean, this is like the worse than COVID, frankly. So lockdown, I think it kicks in when my Santa arrives, I hope.
Right, okay. As long as you get the Santa in first.
Get the